history often feels complete. We read about ancient civilizations, forgotten cities, and discoveries that seem to explain the past in neat and orderly ways. But every so often, something appears that does not fit. A machine built 2,000 years ago that looks like a computer, a manuscript written in a language no one on Earth can read. Massive stone monuments whose builders left no explanation behind. A signal from deep space that lasted only 72 seconds and then vanished forever. These mysteries are scattered across the world, buried beneath deserts, hidden beneath oceans, or carved into mountainsides. Some are thousands of years old. Others happened only decades ago, but all of them share one thing. No one truly knows what they mean. Tonight, we follow these strange clues across history, because sometimes the deeper we look into the past, the more mysterious it becomes. The enigma of the Sanxingdui bronze masks beneath the surface of history. There are discoveries that do more than simply add new pieces to the puzzle of the past. They challenge the puzzle itself. They force us to reconsider what we think we know about ancient civilizations, about their capabilities, and about the depth of knowledge that may have existed long before written records began to preserve it. Across the world, archaeologists have uncovered cities, artifacts, and monuments that hint at complex societies flourishing thousands of years ago. But every once in a while, something emerges from the ground that seems almost out of place. Something that does not easily fit into the familiar narrative of human progress. One such mystery lies deep within the fertile plains of southwestern China. In the misty region of Sichuan province, surrounded by lush farmland and winding rivers, an archaeological site quietly waits beneath the soil. For centuries, the land here appeared ordinary, a patchwork of rural villages and cultivated fields. Yet hidden beneath that calm landscape was the remains of a civilization that seemed to have vanished from history almost entirely. A civilization known today as Sanxingdui. The story of Sanxingdui begins not with a planned excavation or a major scientific expedition, but with a simple and unexpected discovery. In 1929, a farmer digging a ditch on his land reportedly uncovered a cache of strange jade objects buried beneath the earth. At first, the discovery seemed unusual, but not extraordinary. Ancient artifacts were occasionally found across China, reminders of the long and complex civilizations that had flourished in the region. But as more objects surfaced over the following decades, archaeologists began to realize that something far more remarkable might be hidden beneath the ground. Then, in 1986, the mystery exploded into global attention. During a controlled excavation of the area, archaeologists uncovered two massive sacrificial pits filled with objects unlike anything previously seen in Chinese archaeology. These pits were carefully dug and deliberately filled with artifacts that had been burned, broken, and buried with apparent ritual significance. And among these objects were some of the most striking artifacts ever discovered in the ancient world. Gigantic bronze masks. At first glance, the masks appear almost surreal. Their features are exaggerated in ways that immediately draw attention. The eyes are elongated and protruding outward, extending dramatically from the face as if designed to gaze far beyond the ordinary world. The ears stretch outward in large flared shapes, and the noses rise sharply from the center of the face. Some of the masks are enormous, weighing dozens of pounds and measuring nearly a meter in width. Their surfaces carry intricate details that suggest careful craftsmanship and a deep symbolic meaning. But the question that immediately arises when seeing these masks is simple. Why do they look this way? The style is unlike anything found in other ancient Chinese cultures. Traditional Chinese bronze work from the same era typically features intricate patterns, animal motifs, and ceremonial vessels used for rituals. Yet the Sanxingdui masks seem to follow an entirely different artistic tradition. Their exaggerated features almost appear otherworldly. Some observers have described them as resembling mythological beings or spiritual entities rather than human faces. Others have pointed out that their large eyes could symbolize heightened perception or a connection to divine vision. But no interpretation has ever been confirmed. The culture that created these masks flourished around 1200 BC during the Bronze Age, roughly during the period when the Shang and Zhou dynasties were shaping early Chinese civilization. Yet strangely, there is almost no written record describing the people who built Sanxingdui or explaining their customs. Unlike many other ancient societies, they left behind no inscriptions to guide historians, no texts, no historical accounts, only artifacts, and those artifacts raise more questions than answers. Beyond the masks themselves, the excavation pits contained a remarkable array of objects. There were tall bronze statues depicting human figures standing upright with their hands extended forward, as though once holding ceremonial objects that have long since disappeared. There were delicate gold ornaments shaped into intricate patterns. There were jade carvings, ceremonial blades, and sculptures of mythical creatures whose meanings remain unclear. One of the most astonishing discoveries was a bronze statue standing nearly 8 feet tall, believed to be the largest bronze human figure ever found from the ancient world. The craftsmanship required to produce such objects suggests a highly advanced metalworking culture. The bronze casting techniques used in Sanxingdui appear sophisticated, involving complex molds and precise temperature control that would have required considerable skill. This alone raises an important question. If the Sanxingdui people were capable of producing such advanced artifacts, why do they appear so disconnected from the broader history of Chinese civilization? Most ancient cultures leave traces of interaction with neighboring societies. Trade routes, shared artistic styles, or written records often reveal connections between distant regions, but Sanxingdui seems strangely isolated. Its artistic style, technological approach, and symbolic imagery stand apart from the traditions that later defined Chinese culture. It is as though the civilization developed independently, creating its own visual language and spiritual system before suddenly disappearing. The mystery deepens when researchers examine the sacrificial pits themselves. The artifacts discovered within them were not simply buried for preservation. Many appear to have been deliberately destroyed before being placed into the ground. Some objects were broken apart. Others show signs of burning or bending, suggesting that the burial process was part of a ritual event rather than an attempt to hide or protect the items. Why would a society destroy its own precious creations? Some archaeologists believe the pits represent large-scale ceremonial offerings to deities or ancestral spirits. In many ancient cultures, valuable objects were sacrificed during important religious events to honor supernatural forces or ensure prosperity. But if that was the case, what kind of belief system required the destruction of such extraordinary artifacts? And why were these rituals performed in such a dramatic and concentrated manner? Another puzzle lies in the sudden disappearance of the Sanxingdui culture itself. Around 1000 BC, the site appears to have been abandoned. There is no clear evidence of war or invasion, no signs of catastrophic destruction. The city simply seems to have been left behind, its structures gradually reclaimed by the surrounding landscape. Some researchers suggest that environmental changes may have played a role. Geological studies indicate that a massive earthquake may have altered the course of the nearby Min River around that time, disrupting the water supply that sustained the region. If the river shifted away from the city, it could have forced the population to relocate to more stable areas. Yet, even if this explanation accounts for the abandonment of the settlement, it does not fully explain the disappearance of the culture itself. The artistic style of Sanxingdui does not continue in nearby regions. Its distinctive masks and sculptures do not evolve into later traditions. Instead, the civilization seems to fade from the historical record almost completely, and that silence invites speculation. Some researchers believe that Sanxingdui may represent the remains of a previously unknown branch of early Chinese civilization, one that developed alongside other cultures but maintained its own identity before eventually merging with neighboring societies. Others suggest that the city may have been a major religious center rather than a typical settlement, attracting pilgrims and craftsmen who came together for ceremonial purposes. But without written records, these ideas remain difficult to prove. Even today, decades after the first major excavations, archaeologists continue to uncover new discoveries at the Sanxingdui site. Modern technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and advanced chemical analysis have revealed that the region may still contain hidden structures and burial pits waiting to be explored. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle, yet the central mystery remains unchanged. Who were the people who created these masks? What beliefs shaped their artistic vision? And why does their civilization appear so suddenly in the archaeological record only to disappear just as mysteriously? Standing before one of the bronze masks today, displayed under the soft lighting of a museum gallery, it is difficult not to feel a sense of quiet wonder. The eyes of the mask stare outward, frozen in time. For more than 3,000 years, they have gazed silently across the centuries, watching civilizations rise and fall, watching historians struggle to understand the world from which they came. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Sanxingdui discovery is not simply what it reveals about the past. It is what it reminds us about the limits of our knowledge. History often feels complete when we read it in books. Timelines and dynasties create the impression that the past is neatly organized and fully understood. But discoveries like Sanxingdui reveal that the historical record is far from complete. Entire cultures may have flourished, developed complex beliefs, and created remarkable works of art, only to vanish without leaving behind written explanations. And somewhere beneath the soil of Sichuan, beneath fields that still appear ordinary from the surface, there may yet be more secrets waiting to emerge. Because the story of Sanxingdui is not finished. In fact, it may have only just begun. The Antikythera mechanism, the machine lost to time in the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers set sail from the Greek island of Symi, heading into the deep blue waters of the Aegean Sea. Their work was simple, if dangerous. Equipped with heavy diving suits and primitive breathing equipment, they would descend to the ocean floor and gather natural sponges to sell in the markets of the Mediterranean. It was a profession that demanded patience and courage. The divers would sink slowly through the water, guided only by ropes and weighted boots, until the faint light of the surface disappeared above them. At those depths, the ocean becomes quiet in a way that feels almost unnatural. Visibility fades, colors vanish, and the world turns into a silent landscape of rock, sand, and drifting shadows. On one particular dive, near a small rocky island known as Antikythera, one of the divers saw something unexpected on the seabed. At first, he thought he was looking at the scattered bodies of drowned sailors. Bronze limbs lay half buried in the sand. Marble faces stared blankly into the darkness. Large statues appeared to be resting on the ocean floor, as if frozen in the moment of some ancient catastrophe. But as the divers explored further, they realized that what they had discovered was not a graveyard. It was a shipwreck. The remains of a large ancient vessel lay scattered across the seabed, surrounded by cargo that had been resting there for nearly 2,000 years. When archaeologists were called to investigate the site, they began raising objects from the wreckage. There were bronze statues, jewelry, coins, pottery, and finely carved marble sculptures. Each item was a remarkable piece of ancient craftsmanship, but nothing suggested that this discovery would become one of the most important archaeological finds of the 20th century. That moment came later. Among the artifacts lifted from the ocean floor was a small, corroded lump of bronze and wood. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable. Years underwater had covered it in thick layers of mineral deposits and corrosion. It was catalogued and placed among the other objects recovered from the ship. But when researchers examined it more closely, they noticed something unusual. Inside the corroded mass were gears. Not just one or two gears, but dozens of them. Tiny bronze teeth interlocked with remarkable precision, forming an intricate mechanical system hidden inside what looked like a broken fragment of machinery. At the time, the discovery made little sense. The shipwreck itself dated to around the 1st century BC, during the height of the ancient Greek world. Mechanical devices certainly existed in that era, but nothing remotely approaching this level of complexity had ever been discovered from antiquity. It was as if someone had uncovered the inner workings of a clock, except clocks would not appear in Europe for more than 1,000 years. The mysterious device soon became known as the Antikythera mechanism, named after the island near which it had been discovered. And over the following decades, it would challenge historians' understanding of ancient technology. At first, scholars struggled to interpret the device. Many believed it might be a type of astrolabe or navigational instrument used by sailors. Others suggested it could have been part of a decorative machine, perhaps used in a temple or mechanical display. But as technology improved, researchers began to examine the fragments more carefully. In the early 2000s, scientists used advanced imaging techniques, including X-ray tomography, to peer inside the remaining pieces of the mechanism. What they found was astonishing. The Antikythera mechanism was not a simple device. It was a mechanical computer. Inside the fragments were more than 30 precisely engineered bronze gears, arranged in layers. These gears were connected to rotating dials and pointers that could track astronomical cycles with remarkable accuracy. By turning a small crank on the side of the device, the mechanism could simulate the movement of celestial bodies. It could predict the positions of the sun and moon. It could track lunar phases. It could even forecast solar and lunar eclipses. In essence, the machine functioned as an analog computer designed to model the cosmos. And it had been built more than 2,000 years ago. For historians of science, the implications were profound. Before the discovery of the Antikythera mechanism, most scholars believed that technology of this complexity did not exist in the ancient world. Mechanical devices capable of calculating astronomical cycles were thought to be inventions of medieval Europe, yet here was clear evidence that ancient Greek engineers had developed intricate gear systems centuries earlier. The precision of the mechanism is particularly remarkable. Each gear was carefully cut with triangular teeth designed to mesh smoothly with neighboring gears. The ratios between these gears were mathematically calibrated to represent astronomical cycles, such as the Metonic cycle, which tracks the relationship between lunar months and solar years. To create such a device required not only advanced craftsmanship, but also a deep understanding of mathematics and astronomy, which raises an obvious question. Who built it? The Antikythera mechanism was discovered aboard a merchant ship traveling through the Mediterranean. Some historians believe the ship may have been transporting luxury goods and artworks from Greece to wealthy buyers in Rome. If that is true, the mechanism might have been a prized scientific instrument intended for a philosopher, astronomer, or elite patron. But its exact origin remains uncertain. Some researchers have suggested that the device may have been created by scholars influenced by the work of ancient mathematicians, such as Archimedes or Hipparchus. These thinkers were known for their contributions to geometry and astronomy, and historical texts hint that complex mechanical models of the heavens may have existed during their time. However, no written description of a machine quite like the Antikythera mechanism has ever been found. This absence of documentation deepens the mystery. If ancient engineers possessed the knowledge to construct such advanced mechanisms, why are there no surviving records describing them? Why were similar devices not discovered in other archaeological sites? The Antikythera mechanism appears to be unique. For centuries after the shipwreck sank into the sea, the knowledge required to build such machines seems to have vanished. Mechanical technology of comparable sophistication would not reappear in Europe until the development of astronomical clocks in the 14th century. That leaves a gap of more than 1,000 years. It is a gap that historians are still trying to understand. Some scholars believe the device may represent the peak of a technological tradition that was later lost due to social and political upheaval. The ancient world experienced numerous periods of war, economic collapse, and cultural transformation, any of which could have disrupted the transmission of technical knowledge. Libraries were destroyed, cities were abandoned, skilled craftsmen disappeared. It is possible that the Antikythera mechanism was not a singular invention, but rather the last surviving example of a forgotten engineering tradition. Others believe the device may have been an experimental creation, built by a small group of brilliant thinkers whose ideas never spread widely enough to influence later technological development. If so, the mechanism represents a glimpse of what ancient science might have become under different historical circumstances. Standing in front of the fragments of the Antikythera mechanism today, displayed in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, it is difficult to imagine the device as it once appeared. The surviving pieces are broken and incomplete. The bronze surfaces are corroded and worn by centuries beneath the sea. Yet through modern reconstruction, researchers have been able to imagine the original form of the machine. It would have been enclosed within a wooden case about the size of a shoebox. The front panel likely displayed rotating pointers moving across circular dials marked with zodiac symbols and calendar dates. The back of the device contained additional dials used to track longer astronomical cycles. By turning the crank, a user could watch the heavens unfold in miniature mechanical motion, the rising and setting of celestial bodies, the predictable rhythm of eclipses, the hidden mathematics of the cosmos, all represented through a system of bronze gears. In a sense, the Antikythera mechanism represents something profoundly human. It reflects our desire to understand the universe, to observe patterns in the sky, to translate those patterns into knowledge, and ultimately, to build tools that allow us to grasp the structure of the world around us. Yet the device also reminds us of something else. Knowledge is fragile. Civilizations rise and fall. Libraries burn. Technologies are forgotten. And sometimes the most extraordinary achievements of the past survive only by accident. If the Antikythera ship had never sunk beneath the waves, its cargo might have reached its destination, been admired for a time, and eventually disappeared into history without leaving a trace. Instead, it rested quietly on the seabed for nearly 2,000 years, waiting, until a group of sponge divers searching for something entirely different stumbled upon one of the most remarkable machines ever created by the ancient world. Even today, the Antikythera mechanism continues to inspire new research. Scientists are still studying the fragments, scanning them with advanced imaging tools and reconstructing the device through digital models. Each new discovery reveals additional details about how the mechanism worked and what it may have been capable of predicting. But despite more than a century of study, one question remains unanswered. Was this device unique? Or was it simply the only survivor of a technological tradition that history has almost completely erased? For now, the answer remains hidden. Perhaps somewhere beneath the soil of ancient cities or buried within the remains of forgotten shipwrecks, other machines once existed. Machines that could calculate the movements of the heavens long before the modern world rediscovered the science behind them. Until such discoveries emerge, the Antikythera mechanism stands alone. A machine out of time. A reminder that the past still holds secrets waiting to be uncovered. The Voynich manuscript, the book no one can read in the quiet archives of rare book collections. There are manuscripts that scholars understand well. They contain familiar alphabets, recognizable languages, and texts that historians have translated and studied for centuries. But occasionally, among those ancient pages, something appears that defies every attempt at explanation. A book written in a language no one can read. A script no linguist can decode. Illustrations that seem both familiar and alien at the same time. One such book has puzzled historians, linguists, cryptographers, and codebreakers for more than 100 years. It is known today as the Voynich manuscript. The story of this strange book begins in 1912, when a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich visited a Jesuit college near Rome. The college had fallen into financial difficulty and was quietly selling parts of its collection to raise funds. Voynich was already known for discovering rare and valuable manuscripts. During his visit, he was shown a bundle of ancient books that had been stored away for centuries. Among them was a thick volume bound in worn vellum. At first glance, the book appeared medieval. Its pages were filled with neat lines of handwritten text accompanied by colorful illustrations. But as Voynich began to examine the manuscript more closely, he noticed something strange. The writing inside the book was completely unfamiliar. The characters did not resemble Latin, Greek, Arabic, or any known alphabet. They flowed across the page in elegant lines, repeating in patterns that suggested a structured language. Yet no one could read a single word. Voynich immediately realized that the manuscript was extraordinary. He purchased the book and began showing it to scholars across Europe and the United States. Soon, experts in ancient languages were studying its pages, but none of them could understand it. Even today, more than a century later, the Voynich manuscript remains one of the most famous unsolved puzzles in the history of written language. The manuscript itself is estimated to have been created sometime in the early 15th century. Modern carbon dating of the vellum pages suggests a time frame between 1404 and 1438. The book contains about 240 surviving pages, though some appear to be missing. Each page is filled with dense text written in a consistent script. The writing flows from left to right, much like many European languages. Words appear to repeat in predictable patterns, suggesting grammar or structure rather than random symbols. In other words, the manuscript behaves like a real language, but no one knows which language. Adding to the mystery are the illustrations scattered throughout the book. Many pages contain drawings of plants. Some of these plants look vaguely similar to real species, but others appear completely unknown, as though they were invented by the artist. Botanists have tried to identify these plants, hoping they might offer clues about the manuscript's purpose. Yet most of the illustrations resist clear identification. Some scholars believe the plants may be symbolic or stylized rather than literal depictions. Other sections of the book contain diagrams that resemble astronomical charts. Circular illustrations filled with stars, suns, and crescent moons appear to map the heavens in ways that hint at astrology or early cosmology. There are pages that depict mysterious bathing scenes where small human figures, often female, appear to stand in green pools connected by elaborate networks of pipes or channels. These illustrations have been interpreted in many ways. Some researchers believe they represent medieval medical theories involving bathing and herbal remedies. Others suggest they may depict symbolic rituals or alchemical processes, but the truth remains uncertain. Without understanding the text, it is impossible to know what the images truly mean. Over the past century, countless attempts have been made to decode the Voynich manuscript. Some of the world's most skilled cryptographers have tried to break the code. During World War I, experts who had successfully cracked complex military ciphers were asked to examine the manuscript. Yet, even these code breakers could not decipher its meaning. The challenge lies in the structure of the text. If the manuscript were a simple cipher, replacing one letter with another, it would likely have been decoded long ago. But the patterns within the Voynich script do not behave like typical substitution ciphers. Statistical analysis shows that the text follows patterns similar to natural language. Certain symbols appear more frequently than others, and words tend to follow predictable distributions. This suggests that the writing may represent a real language encoded in some unknown way. But if it is a language, no known culture appears to have used it. Over the years, numerous theories have been proposed. Some researchers believe the manuscript could be written in a lost or obscure language encoded using an elaborate cipher. Others suggest it might represent a constructed language invented by the author. There are even theories that the manuscript could be an elaborate hoax designed to fool collectors of rare books. Yet the hoax theory faces its own challenges. Creating such a detailed manuscript would have required enormous effort. The text spans hundreds of pages written in consistent handwriting, and the illustrations show careful planning. If it were a hoax, it would be one of the most elaborate literary deceptions in history. Another possibility is that the manuscript was intended as a personal reference book for herbal medicine or early scientific study. The combination of plant drawings, astronomical diagrams, and bathing scenes suggests that it might have been part of a medical tradition that blended natural remedies with astrological beliefs. In medieval Europe, medicine often incorporated astrology. Physicians believed that the positions of stars and planets could influence human health, and herbal remedies were sometimes prepared according to celestial cycles. But even if the manuscript served such a purpose, the language used to describe it remains unknown. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Voynich manuscript is the possibility that it may have passed through the hands of famous historical figures. A letter discovered within the manuscript suggests that it may once have belonged to Emperor Rudolf I, a Holy Roman emperor known for his fascination with alchemy and mysterious sciences. According to the letter, Rudolf may have purchased the book for a large sum of money, believing it to be the work of the legendary scholar Roger Bacon. If true, the manuscript was already considered mysterious centuries ago. Today, the Voynich manuscript is housed in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. It is preserved carefully under controlled conditions, where scholars continue to study its pages using modern technology. Advanced computer algorithms have been applied to analyze the structure of the text. Artificial intelligence models have attempted to identify patterns that might reveal linguistic meaning. Yet so far, no interpretation has gained universal acceptance. The manuscript remains silent. Standing before the glass case where it is displayed, visitors often feel a strange sense of curiosity. The pages appear ordinary at first. Ink on parchment, illustrations painted in soft greens, blues, and browns. But the moment you realize that no one can read the words before you, the manuscript transforms into something far more mysterious. It becomes a message without a key, a story waiting for a reader who may never come. Perhaps the author of the manuscript believed the text would be easily understood by those familiar with the language or code. Perhaps it was written for a small circle of scholars who shared specialized knowledge, or perhaps the meaning was meant to remain hidden. History is filled with examples of knowledge lost through time. Languages disappear, libraries burn, civilizations collapse. The voices of the past fade into silence. The Voynich manuscript may simply be another example of that loss, or it may represent something more unusual, a book written in a system of knowledge that historians have not yet rediscovered. For now, its pages remain one of the most enduring puzzles in the world of historical research. More than 6 centuries after it was written, the manuscript continues to challenge every attempt at understanding. And somewhere within its elegant lines of strange characters, there may still be a message waiting patiently to be revealed. Göbekli Tepe, the temple older than civilization, there are moments in archaeology when a discovery does more than reveal the past. It challenges the very timeline of human history. For generations, historians believed that the development of civilization followed a predictable sequence. First came agriculture. Once humans learned to grow crops and domesticate animals, permanent villages began to appear. Those villages slowly grew into cities, and with cities came organized religion, monumental architecture, and complex societies. In this traditional narrative, temples and large ceremonial structures were the result of civilization. But in the dry hills of southeastern Turkey, archaeologists uncovered a place that seems to reverse that entire sequence, a place that may suggest something astonishing. That organized religion, or at least monumental spiritual architecture, may have come before civilization itself. This place is known as Göbekli Tepe. The site lies on a limestone ridge overlooking the vast plains of what is now southern Turkey, not far from the border with Syria. From a distance, the hill looks unremarkable. The land is rocky, windswept, and quiet. Shepherds have walked across these hills for centuries, guiding flocks of sheep through the dry grass and scattered stones. For most of history, no one suspected that beneath that hill lay one of the oldest monumental structures ever created by human hands. The story of Göbekli Tepe began in the 1960s when archaeologists conducting a regional survey noticed fragments of carved stone scattered across the ground, but the discovery did not immediately attract much attention. Researchers assumed the stones were remnants of a medieval cemetery or some relatively recent structure, and so the site remained largely ignored for decades. Everything changed in 1994. That year, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt visited the hill while working on nearby excavations. As he examined the scattered stones and partially buried carvings, Schmidt realized something extraordinary. These stones were not medieval. They were far older, and the shapes emerging from the soil suggested that the hill might conceal something much larger beneath its surface. Schmidt began excavating the site the following year. What he uncovered would eventually force historians to rethink the origins of civilization. Just below the surface lay enormous T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in massive circular structures. Some of these pillars stood more than 16 feet tall and weighed several tons. The pillars were carefully carved and placed into the ground, forming rings that appeared to function as ceremonial enclosures. But what made them truly remarkable was their age. Radiocarbon dating of organic material at the site revealed that the structures were built around 9600 BC. That date stunned the archaeological world. 9,600 years before the Common Era. More than 11,000 years ago. That means Göbekli Tepe was constructed thousands of years before Stonehenge, thousands of years before the pyramids of Egypt, and thousands of years before the earliest known cities. Even more surprising was the fact that the people who built Göbekli Tepe were not farmers. They were hunter-gatherers. According to the traditional view of history, societies at this stage of development were small, mobile groups focused primarily on survival. They hunted animals, gathered plants, and moved frequently across the landscape. They were not expected to build enormous stone monuments, yet Göbekli Tepe suggests that they did exactly that. The site contains multiple circular enclosures, each built from massive limestone pillars set into stone foundations. At the center of many enclosures stand 2 taller pillars facing each other, surrounded by smaller pillars arranged in a ring. Many of these pillars are decorated with intricate carvings. Animals appear frequently: foxes, wild boars, snakes, birds, and insects. Some carvings show powerful predators, their bodies stretched along the surface of the stone, as if frozen in motion. Others depict abstract symbols that researchers have struggled to interpret, Perhaps the most striking detail is that the T-shaped pillars themselves appear to represent human figures. Carved arms extend down the sides of some pillars, with hands meeting across the front. In certain examples, belts and loincloths are also visible. This suggests that the pillars may represent stylized human forms, possibly ancestors, spirits, or deities. If this interpretation is correct, Göbekli Tepe may have been one of the earliest known temples ever built. But if hunter-gatherers constructed the site, how did they accomplish such a monumental project? Building Göbekli Tepe would have required extraordinary coordination and effort. The limestone used for the pillars was quarried from nearby bedrock using simple stone tools. Workers then had to carve the massive blocks, transport them across the landscape, and raise them into position. Even today, moving stones of that size would require careful planning and teamwork. To achieve this more than 11,000 years ago suggests that the builders possessed a level of social organization far more advanced than previously assumed for hunter-gatherer communities. Scholars have proposed several theories to explain this. One possibility is that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a gathering place for multiple groups of hunter-gatherers. People from different regions may have traveled to the site for seasonal rituals or ceremonies. Such gatherings could have brought hundreds of individuals together, creating the workforce needed to construct the monumental enclosures. Another theory suggests that the site itself may have helped drive the transition toward agriculture. If large numbers of people were gathering regularly for religious events, they would have needed reliable food supplies. This pressure could have encouraged experimentation with cultivating plants and managing animal populations. In other words, the desire to build and maintain a sacred place may have helped inspire the development of farming. If true, this idea reverses the traditional sequence of history. Instead of agriculture leading to temples, temples may have helped lead to agriculture. As fascinating as Göbekli Tepe is, the site also contains another remarkable mystery. At some point around 8000 BC, the entire complex appears to have been deliberately buried. The enclosures were carefully filled with soil, stones, and debris. This was not the result of natural erosion or collapse. The structures were intentionally covered, and once buried, the site remained hidden for thousands of years. Why would the builders of such an extraordinary place decide to bury it? Some archaeologists believe the burial may have been part of a ritual closure, marking the end of the site's use as new cultural traditions emerged. Others suggest that environmental or social changes may have forced the people of the region to abandon the hill. Whatever the reason, the burial had one unexpected consequence: it preserved the site. By covering the structures with earth, the ancient builders protected the pillars from weathering and destruction. As a result, Göbekli Tepe remained hidden but remarkably intact for more than 10 millennia. Even today, only a small portion of the site has been excavated. Archaeologists estimate that as much as 90% of Göbekli Tepe may still lie buried beneath the hill. Each new excavation season reveals additional structures, carvings, and artifacts that deepen the mystery. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe reminds us that the story of human civilization is still incomplete. For centuries, scholars believed they understood the sequence of events that led to the rise of complex societies. But beneath one quiet hill in Turkey, evidence emerged that suggests the story may be far more complicated. Long before cities rose from river valleys, long before writing recorded the achievements of kings and empires, human beings were already gathering to construct monumental sacred spaces. And somewhere within those ancient stone circles, carved with images of animals and symbols we may never fully understand, lies a silent reminder. Civilization may not have begun in the way we once imagined. The Nazca lines, messages etched into the desert in the southern deserts of Peru, where the land stretches endlessly beneath a cloudless sky, the earth holds one of the most puzzling creations ever made by human hands. At ground level, the landscape appears almost empty. Dry plains extend toward distant mountains. The soil is a mixture of reddish stones and pale dust, hardened by centuries of relentless sun and wind. Little grows here. Rain is rare, and the silence of the desert feels almost timeless. But from high above the ground, an extraordinary picture begins to emerge. Across more than 500 square kilometers of desert, enormous shapes stretch across the Earth's surface. Perfectly straight lines run for miles across the plains. Geometric patterns form vast triangles and spirals. and among them appear giant figures of animals, birds, monkeys, spiders, and mysterious creatures etched into the desert floor. These enormous drawings are known today as the Nazca lines. Some of the figures are hundreds of feet long. One hummingbird stretches nearly 300 feet from wingtip to wingtip. A giant monkey curls its spiral tail across the desert floor. A spider extends delicate legs across the sand in remarkable detail. The most astonishing thing about these drawings is their scale. From the ground, the lines are almost impossible to recognize. They appear only as shallow grooves in the earth. But from the air, the shapes become clear and unmistakable. And that fact has raised a question that has fascinated people for decades. Why would an ancient civilization create massive drawings that could only be fully appreciated from the sky? The Nazca lines were first brought to international attention in the early 20th century. In the 1920s, commercial pilots flying across southern Peru began noticing strange patterns in the desert below. At first, the shapes seemed random, but as more people observed them from the air, the patterns became undeniable. These were not natural formations. They were deliberate designs. Archaeologists soon began studying the lines, and evidence pointed toward the Nazca culture, a civilization that flourished in the region between roughly 200 BC and 600 AD. The Nazca people were skilled artisans known for their elaborate pottery, textiles, and irrigation systems. Living in one of the driest regions on Earth, they developed ingenious methods for managing water, including underground aqueducts that allowed them to farm the desert land. Yet nothing they created compares to the scale of the Nazca lines. The lines themselves were surprisingly simple to make. The surface of the Nazca Desert is covered with dark reddish stones that have been oxidized by centuries of sun exposure. Beneath this thin layer lies a much lighter-colored soil. By removing the top layer of stones and exposing the pale ground below, ancient workers could create visible lines that contrasted with the surrounding desert. Because the region receives very little rainfall and almost no strong winds, these lines have remained preserved for more than 1,000 years. The climate itself acted as a natural protector. But while the technique may have been simple, the planning required to create such enormous figures must have been extraordinary. Some lines stretch for miles in nearly perfect straight paths. Others form complex shapes that require careful proportions and symmetry. Creating these figures would have required teams of workers carefully measuring distances and directions across vast open ground. Yet despite decades of research, the purpose of the Nazca lines remains uncertain. One of the earliest explanations suggested that the lines served as astronomical markers. According to this theory, the Nazca people may have used the lines to track the movements of the sun, moon, and stars across the horizon. Some researchers believed that certain lines aligned with the positions of celestial bodies during important times of the year. However, further studies revealed that while a few lines may correspond with astronomical directions, most do not show consistent alignment with celestial events. This led researchers to consider other possibilities. Another widely discussed theory suggests that the lines may have been connected to religious rituals. The Nazca people lived in an extremely harsh environment where water was scarce and agriculture depended heavily on seasonal conditions. Some archaeologists believe the lines may have been part of ceremonial pathways used during rituals intended to appeal to gods or spirits associated with water and fertility. Walking along these long lines may have been a form of spiritual procession. In this interpretation, the giant animal figures could represent mythological beings connected to nature and the supernatural. There is also evidence that the Nazca people practiced rituals involving offerings to deities believed to control rainfall and natural forces. Some pottery from the region depicts powerful figures associated with water, storms, and agricultural cycles. If the Nazca lines were connected to these beliefs, the desert itself may have functioned as a sacred landscape, a place where people gathered to perform ceremonies intended to maintain balance between humans and the forces of nature. Another intriguing possibility is that the lines served as markers for underground water sources. Modern researchers have discovered that several Nazca lines appear to correspond with ancient aqueduct systems beneath the desert surface. These underground channels, known as puquios, carried water from distant mountain sources to the agricultural fields of Nazca communities. Some scientists suggest that the lines may have helped guide people toward these vital water supplies, or symbolically marked the locations where water flowed beneath the earth. Yet none of these explanations fully accounts for the enormous animal figures scattered across the desert. Why depict creatures such as monkeys, spiders, whales, and birds in such massive scale? Some of these animals were not even native to the immediate desert region. The whale figure, for example, represents a marine creature associated with the distant Pacific Ocean. The spider is believed to represent a species found in nearby rainforests. These details suggest that the Nazca lines may have reflected a broader worldview connecting different ecosystems and spiritual symbols. Perhaps the images represented guardians of the natural world, perhaps they were offerings to unseen powers, or perhaps they served purposes that modern researchers have not yet imagined. Over the years, the mysterious appearance of the lines has inspired more unusual theories as well. Some have speculated that the Nazca lines were created as landing markers for extraterrestrial visitors. This idea gained popularity in the 1960s when the Swiss author Erich von Däniken suggested that the lines were designed to be seen from spacecraft. However, archaeologists have firmly rejected this interpretation. There is no evidence of advanced technology involved in creating the lines, and experiments have shown that the shapes can easily be constructed using simple tools, wooden stakes, and rope for measuring distances. In fact, modern researchers have successfully recreated smaller Nazca-style drawings using techniques available to ancient cultures. The true mystery of the Nazca lines may not lie in how they were created. Rather, it lies in why they were created on such a monumental scale. Standing on the desert floor, the lines are subtle, but rising above them in an airplane or viewing them from satellite imagery reveals their breathtaking complexity. The shapes stretch across the landscape like a massive gallery of ancient art, and the more scientists study them, the more they realize that the Nazca people must have possessed a deep understanding of geometry, measurement, and landscape planning. Even today, new discoveries continue to emerge. In recent years, archaeologists using drone technology and artificial intelligence have identified hundreds of additional geoglyphs hidden across the desert. Many of these newly discovered figures are smaller but equally detailed, depicting animals, humans, and symbolic designs that had previously gone unnoticed. These findings suggest that the Nazca lines represent only part of a much larger system of markings across the desert, a system that may have evolved over generations. And yet the central mystery remains. Why create artwork that is meant to be seen from the sky? Did the Nazca people climb nearby hills to observe their designs? Did they imagine the figures as offerings to gods watching from above? Or did the act of creating the lines itself hold the deeper meaning? Whatever the answer may be, the Nazca lines stand as one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. For more than 15 centuries, these enormous shapes have remained etched into the desert floor, silent, unmoving, waiting. And perhaps somewhere among those long straight lines and giant figures lies a message that we have not yet learned how to read. The Moai of Easter Island, giants of stone far out in the vastness of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from the nearest continent, lies one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. A small triangular island rises from the sea, its volcanic hills shaped by centuries of wind and waves. The island is known today as Easter Island, though its native inhabitants call it Rapa Nui. From the air, the island appears quiet and rugged. Grass-covered slopes roll gently toward the coastline, where dark volcanic cliffs plunge into the deep blue ocean. There are few trees here today, only scattered patches of vegetation and windswept plains. But scattered across this remote island stand hundreds of silent figures. Massive stone statues, some towering more than 30 feet tall. Their elongated faces stare outward across the land, carved with strong brows, deep eye sockets, and solemn expressions that have endured for centuries. These statues are known as the Moai, and they represent one of the most enduring mysteries of ancient human engineering. For generations, travelers arriving on Easter Island have been struck by the strange presence of these giant figures. They stand on ceremonial platforms called ahu, positioned along the coastline and facing inland, as though watching over the island's interior. The statues appear calm and motionless, yet there is something powerful in their stillness. Each Moai seems to carry a personality of its own. Some lean slightly forward, others stand upright and imposing. Many once wore large cylindrical hats carved from red volcanic stone, known as pukao. Yet perhaps the most astonishing detail about the Moai is not their appearance, it is their number. More than 900 statues have been identified across the island. Some remain standing on platforms, while others lie scattered along ancient roads or partially buried in the soil. But for a small island only about 63 square miles in size, the sheer scale of the effort required to create these statues is extraordinary. The Moai were carved primarily from compressed volcanic ash found in a quarry known as Reno Raloku. This quarry lies on the slopes of an extinct volcano near the center of the island. Today, it is one of the most haunting places in the Pacific. The hillside is filled with unfinished statues, some partially carved from the rock, others abandoned before they were fully separated from the stone. Hundreds of Moai remain here, as though frozen in the middle of creation. Some statues are only rough outlines. Others appear almost complete, waiting to be lifted and transported across the island. And that raises one of the most fascinating questions surrounding the Moai. How did the people of Easter Island move such enormous statues across difficult terrain without modern machinery? The statues vary in size, but many weigh between 10 and 80 tons. The largest completed statue ever moved, known as Paro, weighs roughly 82 tons and stands nearly 33 feet tall, and in the quarry itself lies an unfinished statue that would have been even larger, over 65 feet tall, had it been completed. Moving stones of this size would be challenging even with modern equipment. Yet the ancient inhabitants of Easter Island managed to transport hundreds of them across the island and raise them onto ceremonial platforms. For many years, scholars debated how this was accomplished. One early theory suggested that the statues were dragged horizontally across wooden sledges. According to this idea, workers may have used large numbers of logs as rollers to move the statues across the island. However, this theory raised its own problems. Easter Island today has very few trees, and historical evidence suggests that deforestation occurred centuries ago. If logs were used in large numbers, they may have contributed to the island's environmental collapse, but other researchers proposed a different idea. Instead of dragging the statues, perhaps the Moai were walked across the landscape. This theory might sound unusual at first, but experiments conducted in recent decades have shown that it may actually be possible. By attaching ropes to the sides of a statue and carefully rocking it from side to side, teams of people can gradually move the statue forward in a walking motion. This technique takes advantage of the statue's forward-leaning design and curved base. And interestingly, local legends passed down by the island's inhabitants describe the statues as having walked to their final positions. According to oral traditions, the Moai were moved using spiritual power called mana, granted by ancestors and chiefs. While the concept of mana reflects spiritual belief rather than engineering mechanics, the walking theory demonstrates that such stories may contain echoes of real techniques used by ancient builders. Yet moving the statues was only part of the challenge. Once transported, the Moai had to be raised upright onto stone platforms. Some platforms supported multiple statues arranged side by side. This would have required careful coordination, precise balance, and a deep understanding of leverage and construction. And this brings us to another mystery. Why were the Moai built in the first place? Most archaeologists believe that the statues represented deified ancestors. The people of Rapa Nui likely believed that powerful ancestors continued to watch over the living community even after death. By carving massive statues in their likeness, the island's inhabitants created physical symbols of these ancestral guardians. The fact that most Moai face inland rather than toward the sea supports this idea. They appear to be watching over the villages and lands of their descendants, providing protection, maintaining spiritual connection between the living and the dead. But the story of the Moai does not end with their creation. At some point in the island's history, many of the statues were deliberately toppled. Across the island, archaeologists have found Moai lying face down in the dirt, their platforms damaged or abandoned. Evidence suggests that this destruction occurred during a period of social upheaval among the island's inhabitants. By the 17th century, the population of Easter Island may have grown beyond the island's ability to support it. Deforestation, soil erosion, and resource shortages may have triggered conflict between rival groups. During this time, the traditional belief system surrounding the Moai may have collapsed. Clans competing for power began pushing down each other's statues as acts of symbolic warfare. The once mighty guardians of the island were left lying in the grass, and for centuries afterward, many of them remained there. It was not until the 20th century that major restoration efforts began. Archaeologists and local communities worked together to raise several statues back onto their platforms using cranes and modern tools. Today, many Moai stand once again along the island's shores, facing the interior as they once did centuries ago. But even after decades of study, many aspects of the Moai culture remain mysterious. How did such a small and isolated population organize the labor required to create nearly 1,000 monumental statues? What social structures allowed the island's inhabitants to coordinate such massive projects? And what exactly caused the dramatic shift that led to the statues being toppled? Some researchers believe that Easter Island offers an important lesson about environmental sustainability. The island's ecosystem was fragile, and human activity may have pushed it beyond its limits. But others argue that the story is more complex than simple environmental collapse. Recent studies suggest that the people of Rapa Nui adapted creatively to changing conditions, developing new farming techniques and maintaining their culture despite challenges. Whatever the full story may be, the Moai remain among the most recognizable and mysterious monuments on Earth. Standing along the cliffs of Easter Island with the Pacific Ocean stretching endlessly behind them, the statues seem almost timeless. Their expressions are calm, their gaze is steady. And though centuries have passed since the last Moai was carved from volcanic stone, the silent guardians of Rapa Nui still watch over the island. Perhaps they stand not only as monuments to the ancestors who inspired them, but also as reminders of humanity's remarkable ability to shape the landscape in pursuit of meaning, memory, and belief. The Baghdad Battery, ancient electricity. In the modern world, electricity is so deeply woven into daily life that it often goes unnoticed. Lights turn on with the flick of a switch, phones charge overnight, cities glow across the night sky. The invisible flow of electrical energy powers nearly every aspect of modern civilization. But imagine discovering evidence that ancient people may have understood electricity long before modern science formally described it. Imagine a device buried in the soil of an ancient city, quietly waiting for centuries, holding a secret that might challenge our assumptions about technological history. This possibility emerged in the early 20th century, when archaeologists working in the Middle East uncovered a curious object that would later become known as the Baghdad Battery. The story begins in the 1930s, during excavations near the ancient city of Ctesiphon, not far from modern-day Baghdad in Iraq. Archaeologists exploring the region discovered several small clay jars buried among the ruins of settlements, dating back nearly 2,000 years. At first glance, the jars did not appear extraordinary. They were about 5 inches tall, made of simple ceramic, and sealed with a layer of asphalt-like material at the top. But when researchers examined one of the jars more closely, they noticed something unusual inside. Within the clay container was a copper cylinder, and inside that cylinder was a rod of iron. The iron rod did not touch the copper cylinder directly. Instead, it was carefully suspended in the center, held in place by the sealing material at the top of the jar. The arrangement immediately caught the attention of archaeologists. Clay jar, copper cylinder, iron rod. To a modern scientist, this combination looked strangely familiar. It resembled the basic structure of a simple electrical battery. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid such as vinegar, wine, or lemon juice, a chemical reaction could occur between the copper and iron. That reaction could produce a small electrical charge. The discovery raised a fascinating possibility. Had ancient people invented a primitive battery nearly 2,000 years ago? The objects eventually became known as the Baghdad Battery, and they quickly sparked debate among historians and scientists. The jars themselves are believed to date to the period of the Parthian Empire, which ruled much of the Middle East from roughly 247 BC to 224 AD. The Parthians were skilled craftsmen and traders who maintained extensive connections across Asia and the Mediterranean world. But there is little historical evidence suggesting that they understood electricity in the way modern science does, and yet the structure of the jars seemed difficult to ignore. To test the idea, researchers began experimenting with replicas of the artifact. When modern scientists recreated the jars and filled them with acidic liquid such as grape juice or vinegar, the devices were able to produce small voltages of electricity, typically around 1 volt. That may not sound like much, but even a small electrical current can be useful for certain purposes. One intriguing suggestion is that the jars may have been used for electroplating. Electroplating is a process that uses electricity to deposit a thin layer of metal onto the surface of another object. For example, a craftsman might coat a copper object with a thin layer of silver or gold. Some ancient artifacts discovered in the region appear to show evidence of extremely thin metallic coatings, leading a few researchers to speculate that electroplating might have been known in antiquity. If that were true, the Baghdad battery could represent one of the earliest known electrical technologies in human history, but the idea remains controversial. Many historians argue that the electroplating theory lacks convincing evidence. No wires, conductive plates, or clear examples of electroplated objects have been definitively linked to the jars. Without additional components, it is difficult to imagine how the battery could have been used in a practical electrical system. Others suggest that the jars may have served a completely different purpose. Some archaeologists believe they were simply storage containers for scrolls or sacred objects, with the metal components serving structural or symbolic roles rather than electrical ones. Another theory proposes that the jars may have been used in medicinal or ritual practices. In certain ancient healing traditions, mild electric shocks were believed to have therapeutic effects. Natural sources of electricity, such as electric fish, were occasionally used in ancient medicine to treat pain. Perhaps the jars were used to create small electrical sensations during healing rituals. But again, there is little direct evidence to support this interpretation. The truth is that the exact purpose of the Baghdad battery remains uncertain. What makes the mystery especially intriguing is that the jars were not found alone. Several similar artifacts have been discovered across the region, suggesting that they may have been produced in small numbers rather than as a single experimental device. However, none of the jars were discovered alongside clear instructions or associated equipment that would explain their function. As a result, historians continue to debate whether the objects truly represent ancient electrical technology or simply resemble batteries by coincidence. Some researchers caution against projecting modern technological ideas onto ancient artifacts. Human ingenuity often produces objects whose purposes are difficult to interpret centuries later. Without written records explaining how the jars were used, it is possible that their true function may never be known. Yet the possibility of ancient electrical experimentation continues to fascinate scientists and historians alike. If the Baghdad battery did indeed produce electricity, it raises an important question. What might ancient people have done with that knowledge? Throughout history, human curiosity has driven countless discoveries. People have experimented with natural forces long before fully understanding them. The ancient Greeks observed static electricity when rubbing amber with cloth. Early Chinese scholars studied magnetism and the behavior of compasses. It is entirely possible that ancient civilizations encountered electrical phenomena and experimented with them in ways that have not survived in the historical record. The Baghdad battery might represent one of those experiments, a small glimpse into a forgotten chapter of scientific exploration. Standing in a museum today, the artifact appears simple and unassuming: a small clay jar, a copper cylinder, an iron rod. Nothing about its appearance suggests the profound debate it has sparked among historians. And yet, this humble object reminds us that the technological achievements of the ancient world may be more complex than we often assume. Human innovation did not begin in modern laboratories. It began in workshops, marketplaces, and curious minds seeking to understand the forces of nature. Whether the Baghdad battery was truly an ancient electrical device or simply an object whose purpose has been misunderstood, it continues to challenge us to look more carefully at the artifacts of the past. Because sometimes even the smallest discoveries can illuminate new possibilities about the knowledge and creativity of the civilizations that came before us. And somewhere beneath the sands of ancient cities there may still be other objects waiting to reveal secrets that history has not yet uncovered. The Tunguska explosion. The day the sky fell on the morning of June 30, 1908, the vast forests of central Siberia were waking to another quiet summer day. In this remote part of the world, far from cities and railways, the land stretched endlessly in all directions. Dense pine forests covered the rolling hills, broken only by winding rivers and open marshlands. Small groups of indigenous Evenki people moved through the region with their reindeer herds, living much as their ancestors had for generations. It was a place where nature ruled without interruption. But just after 7 o'clock that morning, something extraordinary happened. Witnesses across hundreds of miles reported seeing a brilliant fireball streak across the sky. The object appeared suddenly, blazing through the atmosphere with incredible speed. Its brightness rivaled the sun itself, casting long shadows across the ground. Some described the sky turning white. Others said the object left behind a glowing trail that lingered for minutes after it passed. Then came the explosion. A tremendous blast tore through the silence of the Siberian wilderness. The shockwave was so powerful that it knocked people off their feet more than 40 miles away. Windows shattered in distant villages. Reindeer were thrown into the air. And deep in the forest near the Tunguska River, the explosion flattened the landscape. More than 80 million trees were knocked down across an area of roughly 2,000 square kilometers. The force of the blast radiated outward in a nearly perfect pattern, leaving trees lying on the ground like matchsticks pointing away from the center. Yet at the very heart of the destruction, something strange could be seen. Trees remained standing. Their branches had been stripped away, their trunks scorched and bare. But they had not been knocked down. It was as though a massive explosion had occurred high above the forest canopy. An explosion in the sky. But what caused it? In 1908, the region where the blast occurred was so remote that news of the event traveled slowly. There were no major cities nearby, and few scientists were able to visit the area immediately after the explosion. In fact, it was not until nearly 20 years later that the first serious scientific expedition reached the site. The expedition was led by a Russian mineralogist named Leonid Kulik, who had become fascinated by reports of the mysterious explosion. Kulik suspected that the blast might have been caused by a meteorite impact. If a large meteorite had struck the Earth, it could explain the enormous damage reported in the Siberian forest. So in 1927, Kulik and his team journeyed into the wilderness to investigate. What they found only deepened the mystery. As they approached the center of the explosion zone, they encountered miles upon miles of fallen trees. The pattern of destruction clearly suggested that something had exploded above the ground. But despite careful searching, Kulik and his team found no crater. And more surprisingly, they found no fragments of a meteorite. Normally, when a large meteor strikes the Earth, it leaves behind a crater and scattered debris from the impact. But at Tunguska, there was nothing. No crater. No large pieces of extraterrestrial rock. Only a devastated forest. Over the following decades, scientists proposed numerous explanations for the event. The most widely accepted theory today is that the Tunguska explosion was caused by a meteoroid or comet fragment entering Earth's atmosphere at extremely high speed. As the object plunged toward the surface, the pressure of the atmosphere compressed the air in front of it, causing the object to heat rapidly. Eventually, the stress became too great, and the object exploded in a powerful airburst several miles above the ground. The explosion released enormous energy equivalent to roughly 10 to 15 megatons of tin, hundreds of times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Because the object exploded in the air rather than striking the ground, it left no impact crater. Instead, the shockwave spread outward from the explosion point, flattening the forest below. This explanation accounts for many of the observations recorded at Tunguska, but it still leaves several questions unanswered. For one thing, scientists have struggled to find clear traces of extraterrestrial material at the site. Small amounts of microscopic particles believed to be from a meteor have been discovered in the soil, but the evidence remains limited. Another puzzle involves the strange atmospheric effects reported in the days following the explosion. Across Europe and parts of Asia, people observed unusually bright night skies. In London, for example, newspapers reported that people could read newspapers outdoors at midnight without artificial light. The skies glowed with a faint luminous haze that persisted for several nights. Some scientists believe these glowing skies were caused by fine dust particles thrown high into the atmosphere by the explosion. Others suggest that water vapor from a comet-like object may have contributed to the phenomenon. Then there are the more unusual theories. Over the years, the Tunguska explosion has inspired a wide range of speculative explanations. Some have suggested that the blast may have been caused by an experimental energy weapon or an early nuclear device. Others have proposed that the object responsible might have been a fragment of antimatter, or even a miniature black hole passing through Earth's atmosphere. Perhaps the most imaginative theories involve extraterrestrial spacecraft. According to some interpretations, the explosion could have resulted from the destruction of an alien vehicle entering Earth's atmosphere. However, there is no scientific evidence supporting such claims. While these ideas capture the imagination, they remain firmly in the realm of speculation. Most scientists agree that the airburst of a meteoroid or comet fragment remains the most plausible explanation. Yet even within that explanation, many details remain uncertain. One question that continues to intrigue researchers is the size of the object responsible. Estimates suggest that the incoming body may have been between 50 and 100 meters wide. Objects of this size are relatively small by astronomical standards, yet large enough to release devastating energy when entering Earth's atmosphere at cosmic speeds. Fortunately, Tunguska occurred in one of the most remote regions of the planet. If the same event had happened over a densely populated city, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Modern scientists study events like Tunguska carefully because they provide valuable information about the potential dangers posed by near-Earth objects. Astronomers now monitor thousands of asteroids and comets that cross Earth's orbital path, tracking their movements and calculating potential collision risks. Events like Tunguska remind us that Earth exists within a dynamic cosmic environment. Space is not empty. It is filled with rocks, ice, and debris left over from the formation of the solar system. Most of these objects pass harmlessly through space, but occasionally, one intersects with Earth's atmosphere in a spectacular and sometimes destructive way. In 2013, a smaller but similar event occurred over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk, when a meteor exploded high in the atmosphere, producing a shock wave that damaged thousands of buildings. The Chelyabinsk event released only a fraction of the energy of the Tunguska explosion, yet it still injured more than 1,000 people due to shattered glass. Comparing these events helps scientists better understand what happened over Siberia more than a century ago. Still, the Tunguska explosion remains one of the most powerful natural explosions recorded in modern history. Standing today in the forests near the Podkamanaya Tunguska River, visitors can still see the patterns left behind by the blast. New trees have grown over the decades, but the scars of the explosion remain visible in the landscape. The forest itself serves as a reminder of that extraordinary morning in 1908, a moment when the quiet wilderness of Siberia was suddenly shaken by a cosmic event from beyond Earth. And though science has brought us closer to understanding what happened that day, the full details of the Tunguska explosion may never be completely known. Somewhere above the forests of Siberia, more than a century ago, something entered our planet's atmosphere. Something powerful enough to flatten millions of trees. Something that exploded in the sky and vanished without leaving a clear trace behind. A silent visitor from space, gone almost as quickly as it arrived. The Piri Reis map, a map that should not exist in the early 16th century. The world was still a mystery. European explorers had only recently begun sailing across the Atlantic Ocean. Vast portions of the globe remained unknown to the civilizations of Europe, Africa, and Asia. Maps of the time were often incomplete, filled with blank spaces or decorated with drawings of sea monsters and imaginary lands. Cartography was still evolving. Every new voyage brought fresh discoveries that reshaped humanity's understanding of the Earth. And yet, in 1513, a remarkable map appeared that would eventually raise questions historians still debate today. A map created by an Ottoman admiral named Piri Reis. At first glance, the map looked like many other nautical charts of the age of exploration. It was drawn on gazelle skin parchment and showed portions of the Atlantic Ocean with coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the newly discovered lands of the Americas. But the more closely scholars examined the map, the more surprising it became, because parts of the coastline seemed unusually accurate, and some features appeared to depict land that Europeans were not supposed to know about yet. The map itself remained relatively unknown for centuries. It was rediscovered in 1929 during a routine inventory of historical documents at Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. Researchers examining the archives uncovered a fragment of parchment showing a detailed map of the Atlantic Ocean. Only a portion of the origine chart survived, but what remained was enough to spark curiosity. The map clearly showed the western coast of Africa and the eastern coastline of South America. It also appeared to show several Caribbean islands. This was remarkable because the map was drawn only 21 years after Christopher Columbus first reached the Americas in 1492. At that time, knowledge of the New World was still extremely limited. Many maps from the early 1500s contained distorted coastlines and incomplete information. Yet the Piri Reis map seemed surprisingly detailed. Even more intriguing were the notes written along the edges of the parchment. Piri Reis himself explained that he had compiled the map using multiple earlier sources. Some of these sources were Portuguese maps created by explorers who had sailed along the coasts of Africa and South America. Others, according to his own notes, were older charts dating back centuries. One note even claimed that one of the source maps had been drawn by Columbus himself, but the real mystery lies in the southern portion of the map. Below the coastline of South America appears a large landmass extending far to the south. Some researchers have argued that this landmass resembles the shape of Antarctica, and if that interpretation were correct, it would raise a startling question. How could a map created in 1513 show the outline of a continent that was not officially discovered until 1820? This idea gained widespread attention in the mid-20th century when a few writers suggested that the Piri Reis map might depict Antarctica without its modern ice cover. They argued that the southern coastline on the map resembles certain parts of Antarctica's coast when compared with modern maps. According to this theory, the map might have been copied from extremely ancient source material created thousands of years ago when Antarctica may have been free of ice. The idea is dramatic. If true, it would imply that an advanced civilization capable of mapping the Earth existed long before recorded history. However, most historians and geographers remain skeptical of this interpretation. When the map is carefully analyzed using modern cartographic techniques, the southern landmass appears far less mysterious. Many scholars believe the shape simply represents a distorted extension of South America. Early explorers had not yet fully charted the continent's southern coastline, and cartographers often guessed or filled in unknown regions based on incomplete information. Maps of the 16th century frequently included speculative land masses. Some depicted a vast southern continent known as Terra Australis, a theoretical land believed by early geographers to exist in the southern hemisphere. In this context, the landmass on the Piri Reis map may not represent Antarctica at all. Instead, it could simply reflect the limited geographic knowledge of the time. Still, the map remains historically fascinating. Even without the Antarctica theory, the level of detail in some areas suggests that Piri Reis had access to remarkably accurate source material. His notes reveal that he compiled information from approximately 20 earlier maps and charts. These likely included Portuguese navigation maps that were closely guarded secrets during the Age of Exploration. Portuguese sailors had traveled extensively along the coasts of Africa and Brazil, and their maps often contained precise coastal measurements obtained through direct observation. By combining multiple sources, Piri Reis may have created a map that was unusually detailed for its time. This process was not uncommon among cartographers of the era. Maps were often assembled like puzzles with pieces of information gathered from sailors, merchants, explorers, and older manuscripts. Yet the survival of the Piri Reis map provides a rare glimpse into how knowledge traveled across cultures during the early 16th century. The Ottoman Empire sat at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, making it a center of trade and information exchange. Scholars and navigators from different regions shared ideas, technologies, and geographic discoveries. The map created by Piri Reis may represent one of the earliest examples of truly global cartographic knowledge. Interestingly, the Piri Reis map was not the only chart created by the Ottoman admiral. He later produced an extensive navigational guide called Kitab Moai, Badiye, or Book of Navigation, which included detailed descriptions of Mediterranean coastlines and harbors. This work demonstrates that Piri Reis was not simply copying maps blindly. He was an experienced sailor and skilled geographer who understood the importance of accurate navigation. Still, the surviving fragment of his 1513 map continues to capture the imagination of historians and enthusiasts alike. It represents a moment in time when humanity's understanding of the world was expanding rapidly. New continents were being discovered, ancient maps were being rediscovered and reinterpreted, and cartographers were struggling to assemble a coherent picture of the Earth using whatever information they could obtain. Standing before the fragile parchment today, one can almost imagine the process that led to its creation. A table covered with charts from distant voyages, stories told by sailors returning from unknown shores, fragments of older maps whose origins had already faded into history. All of it gathered together by a single cartographer attempting to capture the shape of the world. The Piri Reis map reminds us that knowledge does not always advance in a straight line. Sometimes it spreads through unexpected connections between cultures. Sometimes it is built upon fragments of older discoveries. And sometimes the maps we inherit from the past carry mysteries not because they reveal impossible knowledge, but because they reflect the complex and imperfect process through which humans have always tried to understand their world. More than 500 years after it was drawn, the Piri Reis map remains a fascinating artifact of that process, a snapshot of a moment when the boundaries of the known world were still being drawn, and a reminder that even something as familiar as a map can still inspire questions about how knowledge travels through history. The stone spheres of Costa Rica, perfect circles in the jungle deep within the lush rainforests of Central America, hidden among thick vegetation and winding rivers, lies one of archaeology's most curious puzzles. Scattered across the southern regions of Costa Rica, particularly in the Diquís Delta near the Pacific coast, hundreds of mysterious stone spheres have been discovered. At first glance, they look almost unreal. Massive balls of perfectly shaped stone resting silently in the grass. Some are small enough to hold in your hands. Others are enormous, nearly 8 feet in diameter, and weighing as much as 15 tons. Their surfaces are smooth and carefully rounded, so precise in fact that many visitors initially assume they must be modern creations. But they are not. These spheres were carved centuries ago by a pre-Columbian culture that left behind no written records explaining why they were made. Today they are known simply as the Diquís stone spheres, and despite decades of research, their true purpose remains uncertain. The spheres were first brought to wider attention in the 1930s, when workers from the United Fruit Company began clearing jungle land in southern Costa Rica to establish banana plantations. As bulldozers pushed through dense vegetation, workers started encountering strange stone objects buried beneath the soil. At first, many of the spheres were moved out of the way or even destroyed during construction. Some local legends claimed that the stones contained hidden gold inside them. In several cases, farmers broke open the spheres, hoping to find treasure. But when archaeologists eventually arrived to study the site, they realized the objects were something far more intriguing. The stones had been deliberately shaped into near-perfect spheres. Creating such smooth, symmetrical forms using only stone tools would have required extraordinary patience and skill. Most of the spheres were carved from granodiorite, a hard igneous rock similar to granite. This rock does not naturally occur in perfect spherical shapes. It must be carefully shaped and polished over time. Researchers believe that ancient craftsmen likely began by roughly shaping the stones using hammerstones made from harder rock. They may then have refined the shape through repeated grinding and polishing. Some scientists suggest that controlled heating and cooling techniques could have helped crack away unwanted fragments of stone. But even with these methods, achieving the level of symmetry seen in many of the spheres would have required remarkable craftsmanship. What makes the mystery even deeper is the scale of the project. More than 300 stone spheres have been documented across the region. Some were found arranged in lines, clusters, or geometric patterns. Others appear to have been placed near ancient settlements or ceremonial platforms. These arrangements suggest that the spheres were not simply decorative objects. They likely held cultural or symbolic meaning for the people who created them. Archaeologists believe the spheres were produced by the Diquís culture, which flourished in the region between roughly 700 AD and 1500 AD, just before the arrival of Spanish explorers in Central America. The Diquís people were skilled metalworkers and artisans known for crafting intricate gold ornaments and stone sculptures. Their society appears to have been organized into complex chiefdoms that controlled territories across the fertile river valleys of southern Costa Rica. But unlike the great civilizations of the Maya or the Aztec, the Diquís left behind few monumental structures and no known writing system. As a result, much of what we know about them comes from archaeological discoveries rather than historical documents. This absence of written records leaves many questions unanswered. Why did the Tikiu's people create so many stone spheres? And what did they represent? One possibility is that the spheres served as symbols of power or authority. Some archaeologists believe they may have been placed near the homes or meeting places of local chiefs to demonstrate status and influence. The larger and more precisely crafted spheres could have represented higher social rank. Another theory suggests that the spheres were used to mark important locations within settlements. Their placement in geometric alignments may have had ceremonial or astronomical significance. Some researchers have proposed that the arrangements might correspond with celestial events such as solstices or equinoxes. However, attempts to confirm precise astronomical alignments have produced mixed results. Still, the idea remains intriguing. Ancient cultures around the world often incorporated astronomical knowledge into their architecture and monuments. Stone circles, pyramids, and temples were frequently aligned with the movements of the sun or stars. Perhaps the Diki spheres were part of a similar tradition. There is also the possibility that the spheres held spiritual meaning. In many cultures, the sphere represents unity, completeness, or cosmic balance. The shape itself may have carried symbolic importance. Perfect symmetry can evoke ideas of harmony between nature, the heavens, and human society. Yet without written records from the Dikuis people themselves, these interpretations remain speculative. What makes the mystery even more fascinating is how widely the spheres have been moved over time. Many of the stones discovered during the 20th century were relocated to gardens, parks, or public buildings. Some were transported far from their original locations. While these relocations helped preserve the stones, they also complicated efforts to study their original arrangements. In recent years, archaeologists have made renewed efforts to protect the remaining spheres in their original contexts. Several sites containing intact arrangements have been preserved as part of UNESCO World Heritage Sites, recognizing their cultural and historical significance. These protected locations allow researchers to continue studying the spheres using modern archaeological techniques. Ground-penetrating radar, detailed mapping, and environmental analysis may help reveal how the spheres were originally placed within ancient settlements. But even with these tools, many aspects of the mystery remain unresolved. Standing before one of the largest spheres today can be a strangely powerful experience. The stone surface is cool and smooth. Its shape is almost impossibly symmetrical, and there is something quietly captivating about its simplicity. Unlike towering pyramids or elaborate temples, the Diki spheres do not overwhelm the viewer with grandeur. Instead, they invite quiet curiosity. They ask a simple but profound question. Why? Why did ancient craftsmen invest so much effort into creating perfect stone spheres? Why place them carefully across the landscape? Why repeat the process hundreds of times? Perhaps the answer lies in traditions and beliefs that vanished long ago, or perhaps the spheres served practical purposes that modern researchers have not yet recognized. Whatever the truth may be, the stone spheres of Costa Rica remain among the most intriguing artifacts of the ancient Americas. They remind us that human creativity often expresses itself in unexpected ways, sometimes through towering monuments, sometimes through intricate works of art, and sometimes through a shape so simple, so pure, that it continues to inspire curiosity centuries after its creators have disappeared. Silent and perfectly round, these stones still rest in the grasslands and forests of Costa Rica, watching, waiting, holding their secrets within their smooth and ancient surfaces. Baalbek, the stones that should not move in the fertile Bekaa Valley of modern-day Lebanon, stands one of the most extraordinary archaeological sites in the ancient world. The ruins of Baalbek rise dramatically from the landscape, their towering columns and massive stone platforms reflecting centuries of construction by different civilizations. To visitors, the site appears at first like many other grand Roman temple complexes. There are monumental columns reaching toward the sky, vast courtyards lined with stone, carvings and architectural details that display the unmistakable style of the Roman Empire. But beneath the elegant Roman temples lies something far older and far more mysterious. Something enormous. Deep within the foundation platform supporting the Temple of Jupiter are some of the largest stones ever used in ancient construction. These massive blocks form part of a structure known as the Trilithon. Each stone measures roughly 65 feet long, 14 feet high, and 10 feet wide. And each one weighs approximately 800 tons. To understand just how massive these stones are, imagine stacking more than a dozen modern trucks on top of each other, or lifting the weight of several commercial airplanes. Now imagine moving such stones into position without modern cranes, engines, or hydraulic equipment. The ancient builders of Baalbek did exactly that. And even today, archaeologists and engineers continue to debate how it was accomplished. The trilithon stones are not the only massive blocks at Baalbek. Nearby, in an ancient quarry located about a kilometer from the temple complex, lie even larger stones that were never fully transported. One of these blocks is known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. This enormous piece of limestone measures over 65 feet long and weighs an estimated 1,000 tons. And in recent years, archaeologists discovered an even larger, unfinished stone beneath it, one estimated to weigh more than 1,600 tons. These are among the largest stones ever quarried in human history. Yet somehow, stones weighing hundreds of tons were successfully moved from this quarry and placed precisely into the foundations of Baalbek's massive temple platform. How? That question has puzzled engineers for decades. The Roman Empire is widely credited with constructing the temples visible at Baalbek today. Roman builders were masters of architecture and engineering. They built aqueducts spanning valleys, roads crossing entire continents, and monuments that still stand today. But even Roman engineering rarely involved stones of this extreme size. Most Roman construction relied on smaller blocks that could be lifted and positioned using cranes and pulleys. The trilithon stones far exceed the typical limits of Roman lifting technology. Some researchers believe that the massive foundation blocks may actually predate the Roman structures built above them. According to this theory, the Romans may have inherited an older platform and simply built their temples on top of it. There is evidence that the site was already considered sacred long before Roman times. The region was once home to ancient Phoenician civilizations, and the city itself may have served as a religious center for thousands of years. Some scholars believe the enormous foundation stones may have been placed there by earlier cultures whose engineering methods remain unknown. But even if the stones were placed by the Romans themselves, the question remains: how were they moved? Several practical explanations have been proposed. One possibility is that the builders used large teams of workers pulling the stones across wooden rollers or sledges. The limestone blocks could have been dragged slowly from the quarry using ropes, logs, and manpower. The terrain between the quarry and the temple platform slopes gently downward, which might have helped with transportation. Once the stones reached the construction site, earthen ramps may have been built to gradually raise them into position. By carefully controlling the slope of these ramps and using leverage tools, workers could potentially slide the stones into place. This type of ramp construction was used by ancient Egyptians during the building of pyramids. However, even with ramps and rollers, the sheer size of the Baalbek stones makes the task extremely challenging. Moving a block weighing 800 tons would require enormous coordination and an immense workforce. Modern engineers who have studied the problem suggest that thousands of workers may have been involved in the process. Yet despite these challenges, the stones were not only moved, they were placed with remarkable precision. The trilithon blocks fit tightly together, forming a stable platform that has supported massive temple structures for nearly 2,000 years. And this precision raises another fascinating detail. The stones are positioned with such careful alignment that very little space exists between them. The builders clearly possessed advanced knowledge of stone cutting and structural stability. The mystery of Baalbek has inspired many imaginative theories over the years. Some writers have suggested that the massive stones may have been moved using lost technologies or advanced mechanical devices that have not survived in the archaeological record. Others have speculated about more unusual possibilities, including the involvement of extraterrestrial visitors or ancient civilizations with forgotten engineering knowledge. But while such ideas capture the imagination, there is no scientific evidence supporting them. Most archaeologists believe the stones were moved using techniques available to ancient builders' methods based on manpower, simple machines, and careful planning. Human history contains many examples of extraordinary construction achieved without modern technology. The pyramids of Egypt, the statues of Easter Island, and the massive stone walls of ancient Peru all demonstrate the ingenuity of ancient engineers. Baalbek may represent another example of that ingenuity taken to an extreme scale. Standing among the ruins today, it is difficult not to feel a sense of awe. The towering columns of the Temple of Jupiter rise dramatically against the sky. Each column stands more than 70 feet tall, carved from single pieces of stone. Below them, hidden within the foundation platform, the massive trilithon blocks quietly support the weight of the entire complex. Visitors often walk past these stones without realizing their significance. But those who stop to examine them closely often find themselves asking the same question archaeologists have debated for decades. How did ancient builders accomplish something so immense? Perhaps the answer lies in patience, organization, and determination. Large construction projects in the ancient world often took decades or even generations to complete. Thousands of workers could contribute their labor over long periods of time, gradually transforming raw stone into monumental architecture. When viewed through this lens, Baalbek becomes less a mystery of impossible technology and more a testament to human ambition. A reminder that ancient civilizations were capable of remarkable achievements when resources, leadership, and belief systems aligned. Still, the stones of Baalbek continue to inspire wonder. They remind us that even in an age before engines and machines, human ingenuity could reshape the landscape in ways that still challenge our understanding today. Massive blocks of limestone carved from a hillside moved across the valley, lifted into place with extraordinary precision, and left behind as silent witnesses to the ambitions of ancient builders who dared to think on a monumental scale. The Longyou upon Zedong, the enigma in the quiet countryside of eastern China, surrounded by rice fields, rivers, and gentle hills, lies one of the most baffling archaeological discoveries of modern times. For centuries, villagers in this region had known about certain ponds scattered across the landscape. These ponds appeared ordinary dark pools of water, calm and still, reflecting the surrounding trees and sky. No one suspected that beneath the surface of these quiet ponds lay something extraordinary. Then, in 1992, a local woman decided to do something unusual. Her name was Voynich, a resident of a small village near the city of Longyou County in China's Zhejiang province. Wu had long wondered about the strange ponds that dotted the area. Local legends suggested that the pools might be bottomless, or that they connected to underground rivers deep beneath the earth. Curious to uncover the truth, Wu organized a group of villagers and rented a water pump. Their goal was simple: drain one of the ponds. For days, the pump removed water from the pool. Slowly, the water level dropped, revealing something no one expected to see: stone steps descending into darkness. As the water continued to drain, an enormous underground chamber began to appear. What had once seemed like an ordinary pond was actually the flooded entrance to a massive carved cave. Soon, archaeologists arrived to investigate the discovery, and what they uncovered would become known as the Longyou Caves, one of the most mysterious underground structures ever found. The first cave alone was astonishing. The chamber stretched nearly 1,000 square meters in size, supported by massive stone pillars that rose toward the ceiling. The walls were carefully carved, sloping upward in a precise triangular shape. And perhaps most striking of all, the surfaces of the cave were covered with evenly spaced chisel marks, parallel lines carved into the stone with remarkable consistency. These markings covered nearly every wall, pillar, and ceiling surface inside the cave. But the mystery did not end there. As archaeologists explored the surrounding area, they discovered that this cave was not alone. In total, 24 enormous caves were eventually identified beneath the region. Each cave had been carved entirely by hand from solid sandstone. Each one displayed the same distinctive chisel patterns, and each one appeared to have been deliberately flooded sometime in the past. The scale of the construction is difficult to comprehend. Researchers estimate that more than 1 million cubic meters of stone were removed to create the Longyou Caves. To put that into perspective, that is roughly equivalent to the volume of stone used to build several Egyptian pyramids. Yet, unlike the pyramids, the Longyou Caves were not constructed above ground. They were carved deep beneath the earth. This raises an obvious question: who built them and why? So far, No clear historical record describes the construction of the Longyou caves. China possesses one of the richest and most detailed historical traditions in the world. For thousands of years, Chinese scholars recorded events, construction projects, and royal achievements with meticulous care. Large-scale projects, especially those involving massive labor forces, were typically documented in official records. But in the case of the Longyou caves, no such records have been found. It is as though the entire project vanished from history. Archaeologists believe the caves may have been constructed more than 2,000 years ago, possibly during the Han Dynasty. During that time, China experienced significant population growth and major engineering projects. Canals, roads, and monumental tombs were built across the empire. But even within that context, the Longyou caves remain unusual. For one thing, the caves appear too large and elaborate to be simple mining operations. If the goal had been to extract stone, the builders would likely have removed the material more efficiently. Instead, the caves were carved with symmetrical layouts, carefully shaped pillars, and uniform wall patterns. This suggests that the builders intended the caves themselves to be the final structure, not merely a byproduct of quarrying. Another puzzling feature is the precision of the carvings. The chisel marks covering the cave surfaces form parallel lines spaced evenly across the stone. This pattern appears throughout every chamber, as if the builders followed strict guidelines during construction. Creating such consistent markings across vast underground spaces would have required enormous discipline and coordination. It also implies that many workers may have been involved, but again, there are no records describing such an effort. Another mystery lies in the engineering of the caves themselves. Despite their enormous size, the chambers remain structurally stable. The pillars are carefully positioned to support the ceiling. The walls are angled to distribute weight evenly. And, after more than 2,000 years, the caves show little sign of collapse. This suggests that the builders possessed advanced knowledge of structural design and rock stability, yet their techniques remain largely unknown. So what were the Longyou caves used for? Several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that the caves served as underground storage facilities. Large chambers could have been used to store grain, tools, or supplies in a stable environment, protected from weather. However, the elaborate design of the caves seems excessive for simple storage. Another idea is that the caves may have functioned as military shelters or hidden defensive structures. Underground chambers could provide protection during times of conflict, but there is little evidence of fortifications or defensive features inside the caves. A third theory suggests that the caves were ceremonial or religious spaces. Ancient cultures around the world often created underground sanctuaries associated with spiritual rituals. The quiet darkness of subterranean spaces can evoke powerful symbolic meanings related to the underworld, rebirth, or the cycle of life. Some researchers believe the caves may have served such purposes, yet no clear religious artifacts have been discovered within them. The caves are strangely empty. No inscriptions, no statues, no obvious clues about the people who built them. Even the stone removed during excavation remains a mystery. With more than 1 million cubic meters of rock extracted from the caves, archaeologists would expect to find enormous piles of discarded material nearby, but no such deposits have been clearly identified. Where did all that stone go? Did ancient builders transport it elsewhere? Was it used in construction projects across the region? Or was it somehow dispersed in ways that left little trace? Even modern excavation methods have struggled to answer this question. Standing inside one of the Longyou is an unforgettable experience. The air is cool and quiet. Soft lights illuminate the carved pillars and sloping walls. The parallel chisel marks stretch across the stone like ripples frozen in time. And everywhere you look, there is the unmistakable sense of deliberate design. These caves were not accidents. They were planned, executed with precision, and then, at some point in history, they were abandoned and flooded. Perhaps the people who built them simply moved on. Perhaps their purpose faded with time, or perhaps the knowledge of their creation was lost as generations passed. Whatever the reason, the Longyous and Teresian, one of archaeology's most intriguing mysteries, a vast underground world carved by human hands, hidden beneath quiet ponds for centuries, and we discovered only by chance. Even today, researchers continue to study the caves, hoping that new technologies may reveal clues about their origins. But for now, the Longyou caves remain silent, 24 enormous chambers beneath the earth, waiting patiently for the story of their creation to finally be understood. The Dyatlov Pass incident, a night of unanswered questions in the winter of 1959, deep in the remote mountains of the northern Ural region of the Soviet Union, a group of experienced hikers set out on what should have been a challenging but manageable expedition. The leader of the group was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. Dyatlov was known among his peers as a skilled and disciplined outdoorsman. His team consisted of 9 young hikers, most of them students or recent graduates. They were experienced in winter travel and mountaineering, and many had completed difficult expeditions before. Their goal was to reach Otorten Mountain, a remote peak located deep in the Ural Mountains. The journey would require them to travel more than 300 kilometers on skis through harsh winter terrain. Temperatures in the region often dropped below 30 degrees. Snowstorms and powerful winds were common. But the hikers were prepared. They carried tents, food supplies, and specialized winter gear designed for extreme conditions. In late January, the group departed by train and truck, eventually reaching the last inhabited settlement before entering the wilderness. From there, they began their long trek across the snowy landscape. For several days, everything went according to plan. The hikers recorded their progress in diaries and photographs, documenting the beauty of the snowy mountains and the challenges of traveling through deep snow. Their final photographs show smiling faces, snow-covered slopes, and the determined spirit of young explorers pushing deeper into the wilderness. Then, sometime during the night of February 1st, 1959, something went terribly wrong. Weeks passed without word from the group. When they failed to return as scheduled, concern began to grow. Eventually, search teams composed of students, rescue workers, and military personnel were sent into the mountains. What they discovered would become one of the most perplexing mysteries of the 20th century. The search teams located the hikers' campsite on a slope of a mountain, later known as Dyatlov Pass. The tent was partially buried in snow, but something about it immediately struck the rescuers as deeply strange. The tent had been cut open from the inside. Rather than exiting through the normal entrance, the hikers had slashed their way out of the fabric. Footprints in the snow revealed that the group had fled the tent and moved downhill toward a nearby forest, but they had done so barefoot or wearing only socks. In the freezing darkness of a Siberian winter, why would experienced hikers abandon their shelter in such conditions? The temperature that night likely dropped to around 25 degrees or lower. Without proper clothing, survival in such temperatures would be extremely difficult. Following the tracks through the snow, searchers eventually discovered the first 2 bodies beneath a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. The hikers were dressed only in underwear. Nearby were the remains of a small fire they had apparently tried to build. Several broken branches high in the cedar tree suggested that one of the hikers had climbed the tree, perhaps attempting to see back toward the campsite. Not far from the tree, rescuers found the bodies of 3 more hikers lying between the forest and the tent. Their position suggested that they had attempted to return to the campsite, but collapsed along the way. The remaining 4 hikers were discovered months later, buried beneath deep snow in a nearby ravine. These final bodies revealed even more disturbing details. Several had suffered severe injuries. One hiker had a fractured skull. Another had multiple broken ribs. One woman was missing her tongue, yet strangely, the injuries showed no obvious external wounds. It was as if powerful internal forces had caused the damage without breaking the skin. Medical examiners compared the injuries to those seen in high-impact car accidents, but there were no signs of a struggle or attack at the campsite. Adding to the mystery, investigators detected unusual levels of radiation on some pieces of the hikers' clothing. This discovery fueled speculation about possible military involvement or exposure to experimental technology. Yet no clear explanation emerged. The official Soviet investigation concluded that the hikers had died due to what authorities describe as a compelling natural force. The case was closed. But the true nature of that force was never explained. Over the decades, the Dyatlov Pass incident has inspired countless theories. Some researchers believe the hikers may have been startled by a snow avalanche. In this scenario, the group may have believed their tent was about to be buried under moving snow. Panicking, they cut their way out of the tent and fled downhill. But many experts question this explanation. The slope where the tent was located was relatively shallow, and no clear signs of an avalanche were found at the site. Another theory involves katabatic winds, powerful downhill winds that can occur in mountainous regions. Such winds can produce terrifying sounds and extreme pressure changes, potentially causing panic. However, while katabatic winds are dangerous, they rarely cause people to abandon shelter without clothing. Some researchers have suggested the hikers may have experienced infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced by wind moving across mountain ridges. Infrasound can sometimes create feelings of anxiety or panic in humans, but again, it is difficult to explain the severe injuries found on some of the bodies. More unusual theories have also been proposed. Some witnesses in nearby villages reported seeing strange glowing lights in the sky on the night of the incident. This has led to speculation about secret military tests, experimental weapons, or even extraterrestrial encounters. Others have suggested that the hikers may have encountered a rare natural phenomenon known as a snow slab avalanche, where a thin layer of snow collapses suddenly without leaving obvious traces. Recent computer simulations have shown that such avalanches could produce injuries similar to those observed. In 2020, Russian authorities reopened the case and concluded that a small avalanche was indeed the most likely cause. But even this modern explanation does not fully resolve every detail of the mystery. Why did the hikers flee in such a chaotic manner? Why did some suffer such severe injuries while others did not? And why did the group appear to act with both panic and moments of strange calm, building a fire, climbing a tree, and attempting to return to the tent? Standing today in the quiet mountains of the northern Urals, it is easy to imagine the isolation the hikers must have felt. Snow stretches across the landscape, the wind whispers across the slopes, and the silence of the wilderness feels almost endless. Somewhere on that frozen mountainside, on a dark winter night more than 60 years ago, something happened that forced 9 experienced hikers to abandon their shelter and run into the cold. Perhaps it was a natural disaster, perhaps a rare combination of environmental conditions, or perhaps something else entirely. Whatever the truth may be, the Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of the most haunting mysteries in modern history. A tragedy written in snow, and a reminder that even in our modern age, nature and the unknown can still hold secrets that refuse to be fully explained. Petra, the city hidden in stone in the rugged desert landscapes of southern Jordan, surrounded by towering sandstone cliffs and narrow, winding canyons, lies one of the most extraordinary cities ever carved by human hands. At first, the landscape appears harsh and unforgiving. The air is dry and warm. Rocky hills stretch toward the horizon, and the colors of the desert shift constantly with the changing light deep reds, soft pinks, and shades of gold glowing across the stone. Yet hidden within these cliffs is an ancient city that once stood at the center of a thriving civilization. A city known today as Petra. To reach Petra, visitors must pass through a dramatic natural passage known as the Sikh. The Sikh is a narrow canyon nearly a kilometer long, with towering walls of rock rising more than 80 meters on either side. Walking through this canyon feels like entering another world. Sunlight filters down through the narrow opening above. The sandstone walls twist and curve in unusual shapes, carved by centuries of wind and water. For ancient travelers approaching Petra, this narrow passage would have created a powerful sense of anticipation. And then, at the end of the canyon, something remarkable appears. A massive facade carved directly into the face of the rock. Towering columns, intricate carvings, an elegant structure glowing pink in the desert light. This iconic building is known as Al-Khazne, often called the Treasury. Standing more than 40 meters tall, it is one of the most recognizable structures in the ancient world. But Al-Khazne is only the beginning. Beyond it lies an entire city carved into the cliffs. Petra was the capital of the ancient Nabatean kingdom, a powerful trading civilization that flourished between the 4th century BC and the 1st century AD. The Nabateans were skilled merchants who controlled key trade routes linking Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world. Caravans carrying spices, incense, silk, and precious goods passed through their territory, and Petra became the heart of this trade network. At its peak, The city may have been home to 20,000 to 30,000 people. But what makes Petra truly extraordinary is the way it was built. Instead of constructing buildings from separate blocks of stone, the Nabateans carved entire structures directly into the cliffs. Temples, tombs, and ceremonial halls were sculpted into the sandstone itself. Columns and statues emerged from solid rock. Doorways opened into chambers hidden within the mountain walls. The city became a blend of architecture and landscape, a place where human craftsmanship merged with the natural formations of the desert. But Petra's builders faced a major challenge: water. The region surrounding Petra is extremely dry, receiving only limited rainfall each year. Yet the Nabateans developed a sophisticated system to collect and store water from seasonal floods and rare rainstorms. Using channels carved into the rock, clay pipes, dams, and underground reservoirs, they captured water flowing to the surrounding valleys. This system allowed Petra to support a large population despite its desert environment. It also protected the city from dangerous flash floods that could rush through the narrow canyon entrances. The Nabateans were not only talented architects, they were remarkable engineers. Their ability to manage water in such an unforgiving landscape played a crucial role in the city's success, but Petra's importance eventually began to decline. In 106 AD, the Nabatean kingdom was absorbed into the Roman Empire. Petra remained a regional center under Roman rule, but the major trade routes that had once passed through the city gradually shifted. New sea routes allowed merchants to bypass the desert caravans. As trade patterns changed, Petra's economic importance faded. Then, in the year 363 AD, a powerful earthquake struck the region. Many of the city's structures were damaged, including parts of the water system that had sustained the population. Over time, Petra was slowly abandoned. By the Middle Ages, knowledge of the city had largely disappeared from the Western world. Local Bedouin tribes continued to live in the surrounding region, but Petra itself became a hidden relic of the past. For centuries, the ancient city remained largely unknown to the outside world. Then, in 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt heard rumors of mysterious ruins hidden deep in the desert. Burckhardt was fascinated by the stories, but gaining access to the site was difficult. Foreign travelers were often viewed with suspicion, and the location of Petra was not widely shared with outsiders. To solve this problem, Burckhardt disguised himself as an Arab traveler. Claiming that he wished to visit a sacred site near the ruins, he persuaded a local guide to lead him through the canyon. As he walked through the narrow seek and saw the facade of Al-Khazneh emerge from the rock, Burckhardt realized he had rediscovered one of the lost cities of the ancient world. News of Petra soon spread across Europe. Explorers, archaeologists, and artists traveled to Jordan to study the remarkable city carved into the cliffs. Over time, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of tombs, temples, and structures spread across the surrounding valleys. But even today, much of Petra remains unexplored. Archaeologists believe that large portions of the ancient city may still lie buried beneath sand and debris. Recent studies using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar have revealed possible structures hidden beneath the surface. Some researchers estimate that as much as 85% of Petra may still remain undiscovered. What we see today may represent only a fraction of the original city. Walking through Petra now, visitors can explore massive tomb complexes carved high into the cliffs. They can climb stairways leading to hidden temples overlooking the valley, and they can stand inside enormous rock-cut chambers where ancient ceremonies may once have taken place. But despite centuries of research, Petra still holds many mysteries. Some structures appear unfinished, leaving archaeologists uncertain about their intended purpose. Certain carvings blend architectural styles from multiple cultures, reflecting the Nabateans' connections with Greek, Egyptian, and Roman traditions. And many inscriptions found throughout the city remain only partially understood. Petra was not simply a city, it was a crossroads of civilizations, a meeting point for traders, travelers, and cultures from across the ancient world. Standing among the towering cliffs and silent temples today, it is easy to imagine the bustling life that once filled the desert valley. Camel caravans arriving with goods from distant lands, merchants negotiating prices in busy marketplaces, priests performing rituals in temples carved deep within the stone. For centuries, Petra stood as one of the great cities of the ancient world. Then, gradually, it faded into silence, hidden among the cliffs, forgotten by history, until one explorer walked through a narrow canyon and rediscovered a city carved from stone. Even now, Petra continues to reveal new secrets. And somewhere within those towering sandstone cliffs, more chapters of its story may still be waiting to emerge. The Bimini Road, a path beneath the sea in the warm turquoise waters of the Atlantic Ocean, not far from the islands of the Bahamas, lies an underwater formation that has fascinated divers, explorers, and historians for decades. At first glance, the scene appears peaceful. Sunlight filters through clear blue water, illuminating the sandy ocean floor below. Coral grows along scattered rocks, and schools of fish glide quietly through the gentle currents. But beneath the surface, stretching across the seabed, lies something unusual. Large rectangular stones arranged in a long, straight formation. The blocks appear almost like a paved road or an ancient wall submerged beneath the sea. This mysterious structure is known as the Bimini Road, and ever since its discovery in the late 1960s, it has sparked intense debate. Is it simply a natural rock formation created by geological forces? Or could it be the remains of a long-lost ancient structure, perhaps even connected to the legendary lost city of Atlantis? The story begins in 1968, when a group of divers exploring the waters near North Bimini Island noticed something strange beneath them. At a depth of about 6 meters, they saw a line of massive limestone blocks arranged across the seabed. Some of the stones measured more than 4 meters long and were surprisingly flat on top. They appeared to fit together in a pattern resembling paving stones. The formation stretched for nearly half a mile. From above, the blocks looked almost like the foundation of an ancient harbor or roadway. News of the discovery quickly spread. Photographs and underwater surveys revealed a formation composed of dozens of large stone blocks arranged in a roughly linear pattern. The stones seemed too orderly to be random, and their location sparked immediate excitement among those interested in ancient mysteries. Because decades earlier, the famous psychic Edgar Cayce had made a remarkable prediction. Cayce claimed that remnants of Atlantis would be discovered near the Bahamas in the late 1960s. When the Bimini Road was found in 1968, many believers saw it as confirmation of his prophecy. According to the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, Atlantis was a powerful civilization that existed thousands of years ago before being destroyed by a catastrophic flood. Plato described Atlantis as a highly advanced society located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, often interpreted as the Strait of Gibraltar. After falling out of favor with the gods, the civilization was said to have sunk beneath the ocean in a single day and night of disasters. For centuries, historians have debated whether Atlantis was a real place or simply a philosophical allegory created by Plato. But discoveries like the Bimini Road continue to fuel speculation. Some researchers have argued that the stones resemble ancient construction techniques used in harbor walls or ceremonial platforms. The blocks appear unusually flat and rectangular, and some seem to form layered structures beneath a visible surface. Divers exploring the site have occasionally reported seeing smaller stones beneath the larger ones, creating what appears to be a multi-level foundation. Could this be evidence of an ancient submerged structure, or is the formation simply a natural geological phenomenon? Geologists studying the Bimini Road have proposed a more conventional explanation. They believe the stones are composed of beach rock, a type of limestone that forms naturally when sand and shell fragments become cemented together in shallow coastal waters. Over time, beach rock can crack and fracture into rectangular blocks due to natural stresses such as erosion and shifting sediments. According to this theory, the Bimini Road may have originally formed as a natural rock shelf along the shoreline. As sea levels rose over thousands of years, the formation became submerged beneath the ocean. Wave action and erosion gradually separated the rock into block-like shapes that now resemble paving stones. Many scientists point out that similar beach rock formations can be found in other coastal areas around the world. These formations sometimes create patterns that appear surprisingly artificial, but when examined closely, they reveal natural fracture lines consistent with geological processes. Yet some divers remain unconvinced by the natural explanation. They point to features that seem difficult to explain through erosion alone. For example, certain stones appear stacked on top of one another. Others seem positioned in ways that suggest deliberate placement. There are also reports of smaller stones wedged between larger blocks, resembling construction techniques used to stabilize ancient structures. However, critics argue that such observations may be influenced by the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. The ocean floor is constantly shifting due to currents, storms, and biological activity. Over time, natural processes can rearrange rocks into formations that appear surprisingly structured. This phenomenon is known as pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random shapes. It is the same psychological effect that allows us to see faces in clouds or shapes in shadows. Despite the ongoing debate, the Bimini Road remains a fascinating site for underwater exploration. Divers visiting the area today can swim along the line of massive stones, observing their smooth surfaces and unusual arrangement. The clear waters of the Bahamas make the site particularly beautiful. Sunlight dances across the ocean floor, illuminating the blocks and surrounding coral reefs. Fish weave through the gaps between the stones, and sea turtles occasionally glide past the formation. Whether natural or ancient, the Bimini Road has become an iconic underwater landmark. It also serves as a reminder of how much of Earth's history remains hidden beneath the sea. Throughout the last ice age, sea levels were dramatically lower than they are today. Vast coastal plains that are now submerged were once dry land. Ancient human settlements may have existed along those coastlines thousands of years ago. As glaciers melted and sea levels rose, many of those landscapes disappeared beneath the ocean. Modern underwater archaeology has already uncovered submerged cities, harbors, and settlements around the world. Places that once stood above sea level now rest quietly beneath the waves. Could the Bimini Road represent part of such a lost coastal structure? Or is it simply a natural formation whose unusual appearance has sparked imaginative interpretations? For now, the answer remains uncertain. Standing above the water on the shores of Bimini Island, looking out across the endless blue horizon, it is easy to imagine how many secrets might still lie beneath the ocean. The sea covers more than 70% of our planet. Much of it remains unexplored. Hidden landscapes, ancient coastlines, and forgotten ruins may still exist beneath those waters. And perhaps somewhere among them lies the truth behind legends like Atlantis. Until then, the stones of the Bimini Road will continue to rest quietly on the ocean floor, a line of mysterious blocks stretching across the seabed, waiting for the day when their true origin might finally be understood. Great Zimbabwe, the forgotten stone kingdom across the rolling highlands of southeastern Africa, surrounded by grassy plains and scattered granite hills, stand the silent ruins of one of the most impressive ancient cities on the continent. The place is known as Great Zimbabwe. At first glance, the ruins appear both majestic and mysterious. Massive stone walls curve across the landscape in sweeping arcs. Towers of stacked granite rise above the surrounding fields. Narrow passageways wind between ancient structures, creating the impression of a city that once bustled with life. But unlike many ancient monuments around the world, Great Zimbabwe was not built by carving into cliffs or stacking enormous megaliths. Instead, its walls were constructed from thousands upon thousands of carefully shaped granite blocks. And perhaps the most remarkable detail is this: no mortar was used. Each stone was placed carefully on top of another, fitted together with precision that has allowed the walls to stand for centuries. Some sections reach heights of more than 11 meters and extend for hundreds of meters across the hills. These structures represent one of the largest and most sophisticated stone-building traditions in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet for many years, the true story of Great Zimbabwe remained hidden behind misunderstanding and mystery. Archaeologists believe the city was built by the ancestors of the Shona people between roughly 1100 and 1450 AD. During that time, the region became the center of a powerful trading kingdom. Great Zimbabwe sat at the crossroads of important trade routes connecting inland Africa with the eastern coast of the continent. From coastal ports along the Indian Ocean, merchants traded goods with distant civilizations in China, India, and the Middle East. Caravans carried gold, ivory, and exotic animals from the interior of Africa to the coast. In return, foreign merchants brought ceramics, glass beads, and fine textiles. Evidence of these international connections has been found throughout the ruins. Fragments of Chinese porcelain and Persian glassware have been discovered among the stone structures, suggesting that Great Zimbabwe was part of a vast network of global trade. At its height, the city may have supported a population of up to 20,000 people. But the layout of Great Zimbabwe reveals something even more fascinating. The site is divided into three major areas. The first is known as the Hill Complex, built atop a rocky granite hill overlooking the surrounding landscape. This elevated area may have served as the residence of the ruling elite or as a ceremonial center for religious rituals. From the hill complex, leaders could observe the valleys below and maintain authority over the surrounding region. The second major area is the valley ruins, where archaeologists have found remains of homes, workshops, and living spaces. This was likely where most of the city's population lived. But the most famous part of Great Zimbabwe is the structure known as the Great Enclosure. The Great Enclosure is an enormous circular wall nearly 250 meters in circumference. Its outer wall rises as high as 11 meters and is built entirely from stacked granite stones. Inside the enclosure stands a mysterious conical tower made of solid stone. This tower has puzzled archaeologists for decades. Unlike most structures, the tower contains no internal chamber or doorway. It is simply a massive stone cone rising within the enclosure. Some researchers believe it may have symbolized royal authority or fertility. Others think it could have represented a grain storage structure or an emblem of wealth. But no one knows its exact purpose. The construction of these massive stone walls raises an obvious question. How were they built? The builders of Great Zimbabwe used a technique known as dry stone masonry. Granite blocks were shaped carefully and stacked together without any binding material. Each stone was placed precisely so that its weight helped stabilize the structure. Over time, this method created walls that were both strong and flexible. The slight gaps between stones allowed the structures to absorb environmental stress without collapsing. This engineering technique demonstrates an advanced understanding of construction and material behavior. Yet despite this impressive achievement, the origins of Great Zimbabwe were misunderstood for many years. When European explorers first encountered the ruins in the 19th century, some refused to believe that such sophisticated structures could have been built by African civilizations. Instead, they proposed alternative explanations. Some claimed the ruins were built by ancient Phoenicians. Others suggested connections to the biblical Queen of Sheba. These theories were not based on archaeological evidence. Rather, they reflected colonial-era biases that underestimated the capabilities of African societies. Modern research has firmly established that Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. Archaeological evidence, oral traditions, and linguistic studies all support this conclusion. Today, the site stands as a powerful symbol of African history and cultural achievement, but the question remains: why was Great Zimbabwe eventually abandoned? Around the mid-1400s, the city appears to have experienced a gradual decline. Several factors may have contributed. One possibility is environmental change. As the population grew, the surrounding land may have been overgrazed by cattle and livestock. Deforestation could have reduced the availability of resources needed to support such a large community. Another factor may have been shifts in trade routes. New political centers emerged further north, particularly in the Kingdom of Mutapa. These changes may have redirected trade away from Great Zimbabwe, weakening its economic importance. As trade declined and resources became scarce, the population may have slowly moved to other regions. By the time European travelers reached the area centuries later, the once great city had already fallen silent. Today, the ruins of Great Zimbabwe remain one of the most important archaeological sites in Africa. Visitors walking through the ancient stone corridors can still see the remarkable craftsmanship of the builders. Massive walls curve gracefully across the hills. Narrow passageways guide travelers through spaces that once echoed with the sounds of a thriving city. Standing inside the great enclosure, surrounded by towering stone walls, it is easy to imagine the ceremonies, markets, and daily life that once filled the area. But the ruins also carry a quiet reminder. Civilizations rise and fall. Cities flourish and then fade. What remains are the structures people leave behind. Stone walls built with care and precision, silent witnesses to the ambitions and achievements of those who came before us. Great Zimbabwe stands today not only as an archaeological mystery, but also as a testament to the creativity and resilience of the people who built it. A city carved from granite, a center of trade and power, and a reminder that history often holds far more stories than we once imagined. The Taos hum, a sound that should not exist in the quiet desert landscapes of the American Southwest, where vast skies stretch endlessly above mesas and mountains. There is a small town known for its art, history, and peaceful atmosphere. The town is called Taos. Visitors come here for many reasons. Some are drawn by the beauty of the surrounding desert and the distant peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Others visit the ancient adobe settlement known as Taos Pueblo, one of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in North America. But in the early 1990s, Taos became known for something far stranger. A sound, a faint, persistent noise that some residents claim to hear yet others cannot hear at all. It is known as the Taos hum. The sound has been described in many different ways. Some people say it resembles the low rumble of a distant diesel engine. Others compare it to the constant hum of electrical equipment, or a deep vibrating tone, just at the edge of hearing. It is usually quiet, but it can become deeply irritating to those who perceive it. For some residents, the sound is not merely an annoyance. It disrupts sleep. It causes headaches, anxiety, and feelings of pressure in the ears. Yet when investigators attempt to measure the sound using scientific instruments, they often find nothing unusual. This contradiction makes the Taos hum one of the most puzzling sensory mysteries ever reported. The phenomenon first gained widespread attention around 1991, when a number of Taos residents began reporting the strange noise to local authorities. The complaints came from individuals living in different parts of the town. Many described hearing the same low-frequency vibration. But when researchers visited their homes, they struggled to detect any clear acoustic source. The mystery soon attracted national attention. Scientists, engineers, and government agencies began investigating the reports. One of the first steps was to determine whether the hum was a real sound or a psychological phenomenon. Researchers conducted surveys among the town's population. They discovered that roughly 2% of residents claimed to hear the hum. Interestingly, most of those who reported hearing it described remarkably similar characteristics. The sound was typically low frequency. It was most noticeable at night, and it often seemed stronger indoors than outdoors. To investigate further, a team of scientists conducted extensive acoustic measurements around Taos. They used sensitive microphones capable of detecting extremely low-frequency vibrations known as infrasound. Infrasound exists below the range of normal human hearing. It can be produced by natural sources such as wind, ocean waves, or distant storms. But despite these efforts, researchers failed to identify any consistent sound source strong enough to explain the widespread reports. This left scientists facing a difficult question. If the hum could not be measured reliably, what were people hearing? One possible explanation involves low-frequency environmental noise. Modern society produces a constant background of mechanical vibrations. Factories, ventilation systems, electrical power lines, and distant traffic can all generate low-frequency sounds. These sounds can travel long distances and sometimes become trapped by atmospheric conditions. In certain environments, these frequencies may resonate within buildings or enclosed spaces. For individuals particularly sensitive to low-frequency sound, this could create the sensation of a constant hum, but this explanation has limitations. Many residents who hear the hum report that it persists even in extremely quiet locations far from industrial activity. Others claim the sound follows them wherever they go within the town. Another theory suggests that the hum may originate from geological activity. The region around Taos sits within a complex landscape of faults and underground rock formations. Some scientists have proposed that subtle vibrations within the Earth's crust might produce low-frequency acoustic waves. However, no clear geological mechanism has been identified that could generate such persistent sounds. Another possibility involves electromagnetic signals. Certain types of electrical equipment can produce electromagnetic fields that interact with human sensory systems. Some researchers believe that electromagnetic radiation from communication towers or military installations could potentially create auditory sensations in sensitive individuals. But again, the evidence remains inconclusive. Perhaps the most intriguing explanation involves the human body itself. Our ears and brains are incredibly sensitive instruments. The auditory system can sometimes interpret internal physiological signals as external sounds. For example, conditions such as tinnitus cause people to perceive ringing or buzzing noises that have no external source. However, tinnitus usually produces high-pitched tones rather than the deep rumbling hum described by Taos residents. Still, some scientists suspect that the hum may involve a complex interaction between environmental noise and human perception. Certain individuals may possess heightened sensitivity to specific frequencies that others simply cannot detect. Interestingly, the Taos hum is not unique. Similar reports have appeared in other locations around the world. In the city of Bristol, residents reported hearing a mysterious hum during the 1970s. In Windsor, a similar phenomenon was documented in the 2010s, where persistent low-frequency sound disturbed thousands of people. In many of these cases, investigators eventually traced the hum to industrial machinery, distant factories, or unusual atmospheric conditions. But in Taos, no definitive source has ever been identified. The mystery continues to divide researchers. Some believe the hum represents a genuine acoustic phenomenon that is simply proven difficult to measure. Others believe it may arise from a combination of psychological and environmental factors. The human brain is remarkably skilled at detecting patterns, even when those patterns are subtle or ambiguous. Once awareness of the hum spread through the community, it may have influenced how people interpreted faint background sounds. Yet, for those who hear it, the experience feels very real. Several residents have described spending nights searching their homes for hidden machinery or electrical equipment. Others have moved away from the town entirely in hopes of escaping the sound. But many report that the hum remains with them even after relocating. Standing beneath the vast desert sky outside Taos at night, the landscape feels profoundly quiet. Wind moves softly through the sagebrush. The distant mountains sit in silence beneath the stars. Yet for some people in this peaceful town, a faint vibration seems to linger in the air. A sound that cannot easily be measured. A tone that only certain ears can detect. Whether the Taos hum represents an environmental mystery, a perceptual phenomenon, or something else entirely remains uncertain. But its persistence reminds us of something important. Even in an age of advanced technology and scientific instruments, the human experience still contains mysteries that are not easily explained. Some sounds may exist just beyond the limits of what we can measure. Some sensations may arise from interactions between the world around us and the complex systems within our own bodies. And sometimes, the quietest mysteries can be the hardest to understand. The wow signal, a message from the stars? On a quiet summer night in 1977, deep in the countryside of the American state of Ohio, a radio telescope was quietly listening to the universe. The instrument was part of a scientific program designed to search for signals that might indicate the presence of intelligent life beyond Earth. For decades, astronomers had wondered whether advanced civilizations might be broadcasting signals into space. Radio waves travel vast distances across the cosmos, carrying information far beyond the limits of visible light. If another civilization existed somewhere among the billions of stars in our galaxy, radio astronomy offered one of the most promising ways to detect it. The telescope conducting this search was known as the Big Ear Radio Observatory. Unlike the massive dish-shaped telescopes often seen in photographs, Big Ear was a long, fixed structure designed specifically for scanning the sky. It did not move like most telescopes. Instead, it relied on the rotation of the Earth. As our planet slowly turned, different parts of the sky passed over the telescope's field of view. Sensitive receivers recorded incoming radio signals, which were then printed out as streams of numbers and letters on long sheets of computer paper. Most of the signals recorded by Big Ear were completely ordinary. They came from natural cosmic sources, galaxies and clouds of interstellar gas. These signals followed predictable patterns that astronomers understood well. But on the night of August 15, 1977, something unusual appeared in the data. The signal was detected by a researcher named Jerry R. Aman, who was reviewing the telescope's printouts several days later. As Aman scanned the columns of numbers and letters, one sequence immediately caught his attention. The signal was far stronger than the background noise normally recorded by the telescope. So strong, in fact, that Aman circled the sequence on the printout and wrote a single word in the margin: "Wow." From that moment forward, the mysterious transmission became known as the wow signal. The signal lasted exactly 72 seconds, the maximum time that Big Ear could observe a single point in the sky as the Earth rotated. During that brief window, the telescope recorded a powerful burst of radio energy. What made the signal particularly interesting was its frequency. It occurred at 1420 megahertz, a frequency associated with hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. For this reason, many scientists believe that if intelligent civilizations were attempting to communicate across interstellar distances, they might choose this frequency as a universal reference point, because hydrogen is found everywhere. In other words, it could serve as a cosmic meeting place for radio communication. The signal's strength and frequency immediately raised an exciting possibility. Could this have been a transmission from an intelligent source? At first glance, the data seemed extraordinary. The signal rose sharply in intensity as it entered the telescope's detection area, then gradually faded as the Earth's rotation carried the telescope away from the source. This pattern was exactly what scientists would expect from a distant signal originating from a fixed location in space. It did not behave like random noise. It looked like a genuine signal. But the mystery deepened when astronomers attempted to detect it again. In the years that followed, scientists repeatedly pointed radio telescopes toward the region of space where the signal had originated. They hoped to find the source and confirm whether it might represent a repeating transmission, but the signal never returned. Despite decades of observation, no identical signal has ever been detected again. The source region lies in the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near a cluster of stars. But because the Big Ear telescope had relatively low resolution, scientists were unable to pinpoint the exact location of the source. The signal could have originated from any one of several nearby stars, or from somewhere much farther away. This uncertainty left researchers with a difficult challenge. Without a second detection, it was impossible to confirm whether the signal was truly extraterrestrial in origin. Over the years, scientists have proposed several possible explanations. One possibility is that the signal was produced by a natural cosmic source that scientists have not yet fully understood. Certain astronomical events, such as bursts of radiation from neutron stars or unusual activity in distant galaxies, can produce powerful radio emissions. However, most natural radio signals tend to have broader frequency ranges or longer durations than the narrow 72-second burst recorded by Big Ear. Another possibility is that the signal came from a human-made source. Satellites, spacecraft, or ground-based transmitters sometimes produce radio interference that can be detected by sensitive instruments. But investigations conducted after the discovery found no known satellites or transmissions operating at the exact frequency and location of the signal at that time. More recently, scientists have suggested that the signal might have originated from a passing comet. Comets contain large clouds of hydrogen gas that can emit radio waves under certain conditions. In 2017, researchers proposed that two comets passing through the region of space near Sagittarius might have produced the signal. However, this explanation remains debated, and many astronomers argue that the signal's strength and characteristics do not fully match typical comet emissions. Because none of these explanations have been confirmed, the wow signal remains one of the most intriguing events in the history of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. For scientists involved in the SETI program, the signal represents both a tantalizing clue and a frustrating mystery. It demonstrates that unusual signals can appear in our instruments, signals that stand out dramatically from the cosmic background, yet without repetition or confirmation, they remain impossible to interpret with certainty. Today, the search for extraterrestrial signals continues with far more advanced technology. Modern radio telescopes can monitor enormous regions of the sky simultaneously. Powerful computer algorithms analyze vast streams of data, searching for patterns that might indicate artificial transmissions. Projects such as the Breakthrough Listen initiative now scan millions of stars across the Milky Way. So far, none have produced a signal quite like the one Jerry Amon circled on that sheet of computer paper in 1977. Yet the mystery remains powerful, because it raises a profound possibility. Somewhere out there, among the hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy, intelligent life may exist. Civilizations may rise and fall. Signals may travel silently through space for centuries or millennia. And occasionally, one of those signals might reach a small radio telescope on a quiet planet orbiting an ordinary star. For 72 seconds, in the summer of 1977, something unusual crossed the sky above Earth. A signal, A pattern. A moment that made one scientist pause and write a single word in surprise. Wow! And even today, nearly half a century later, the universe has not yet told us what it meant. The Antikythera mechanism, the ancient machine that should not exist in the year 1901, sponge divers searching the waters of the Mediterranean Sea made a discovery that would eventually become one of the most extraordinary puzzles in the history of science. The divers were exploring the remains of an ancient shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera. At first, the wreck seemed typical of many ancient maritime discoveries. Fragments of pottery, statues made of bronze and marble, coins and artifacts scattered across the ocean floor. The ship itself appeared to have sunk sometime around the 1st century BC, likely while transporting luxury goods from the eastern Mediterranean to Roman markets. But among the artifacts recovered from the wreck was something very strange. A small lump of corroded bronze and wood. At first glance, it looked like little more than a heavily damaged piece of scrap metal. Yet when scientists began examining the object more closely, they noticed something unusual embedded within the corroded fragments. Tiny gears, dozens of them. Carefully shaped bronze gears with teeth cut into precise mathematical patterns. This mysterious object would later become known as the Antikythera mechanism, and it would challenge everything historians believed about ancient technology. At first, the discovery puzzled researchers. Ancient Greek civilizations were known for their achievements in philosophy, mathematics, and engineering. They built complex machines such as water clocks and mechanical devices powered by gears, but nothing remotely as intricate as the Antikythera mechanism had ever been found before. When scientists began reconstructing the device, they realized it was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Inside the small box were more than 30 interlocking bronze gears. These gears formed a mechanical system capable of performing precise calculations related to astronomy. In essence, the device functioned as a kind of ancient analog computer. By turning a small hand crank on the side of the mechanism, the gears would rotate and display information on several circular dials. These dials could predict the positions of the sun and moon in the sky. They could track lunar phases. They could even forecast eclipses years in advance. The mechanism also appears to have tracked the cycles of the ancient Olympic Games. This extraordinary level of mechanical sophistication stunned historians because the device was built more than 2,000 years ago. For centuries, scholars believed that complex geared machines did not appear until the development of medieval clockmaking in Europe. But the Antikythera mechanism clearly demonstrated that advanced mechanical engineering existed far earlier than anyone had realized. The question was obvious. Who built it? And how did such knowledge disappear for nearly 2,000 years? Researchers believe the mechanism was likely created by Greek scientists sometime around 100 BC. During this period, the ancient world was experiencing remarkable advances in mathematics and astronomy. Greek scholars had already calculated the approximate size of the Earth. They had developed sophisticated models describing the motion of celestial bodies. One of the leading centers of scientific research during this time was the famous Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria housed thousands of scrolls containing knowledge from across the ancient world. Scholars working there studied mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and philosophy. It is possible that the knowledge required to build the Antikythera mechanism originated in this environment of intellectual discovery. Some historians believe the device may even be connected to the work of Archimedes, one of the greatest scientific minds of the ancient world. Archimedes was known for designing complex mechanical systems and mathematical models. Although no direct evidence links him to the mechanism, the level of engineering involved suggests the work of highly skilled scientists and craftsmen. Yet despite its brilliance, the technology behind the Antikythera mechanism appears to have vanished after the fall of the ancient Greek world. Why? One possibility is that such devices were extremely rare and difficult to construct. The mechanism required precise metalworking techniques, capable of producing tiny gears with carefully spaced teeth. Even a small error could disrupt the entire system. Only a few highly skilled artisans may have possessed the knowledge required to build such machines. If that knowledge was lost due to war, political upheaval, or economic decline, the technology could easily disappear. Another possibility involves the destruction of ancient centers of learning. Over the centuries, libraries and scholarly institutions throughout the Mediterranean world were destroyed during conflicts and invasions. The famous Library of Alexandria itself suffered multiple fires and eventually disappeared entirely. With it may have vanished countless scientific manuscripts describing technologies we have never rediscovered. For nearly 2,000 years, the Antikythera mechanism remained hidden beneath the sea, covered in coral and mineral deposits, its gears frozen in place by centuries of corrosion. Only modern technology allowed researchers to finally unlock its secrets. Beginning in the early 2000s, scientists used advanced imaging techniques such as X-ray tomography to peer inside the fragments without damaging them. These scans revealed intricate internal structures that could not be seen with the naked eye. Hidden inscriptions carved into the metal surfaces provided additional clues about the device's purpose. The more researchers studied the mechanism, the more impressive it became. Its gear ratios corresponded precisely with known astronomical cycles. The device accounted for the irregular orbit of the moon. It even modeled complex eclipse prediction systems used by ancient astronomers. In many ways, the mechanism represents a level of mechanical engineering that would not appear again in Europe until the development of astronomical clocks more than 1,000 years later. Today, reconstructed models of the Antikythera mechanism allow scientists and historians to demonstrate how the device once worked. Turning the crank slowly rotates the gears. Pointers move across engraved dials. And suddenly, the ancient sky comes alive. The phases of the moon shift. Eclipse predictions appear. Planetary cycles unfold through carefully calculated motion. Standing before one of these reconstructions today can feel almost surreal, because it forces us to rethink what ancient civilizations were capable of achieving. The people who built the Antikythera mechanism were not simply philosophers gazing at the stars. They were engineers capable of translating astronomical knowledge into mechanical systems precise enough to predict events in the heavens. It reminds us that ancient history is often more sophisticated than we assume. Civilizations thousands of years ago possessed remarkable knowledge. Sometimes that knowledge was preserved and passed down through generations. Other times, it was lost, buried beneath ruins, forgotten beneath layers of time, until one day, by chance, it reappears. The Antikythera mechanism is not merely a machine, it is a message from the past, a reminder that the ancient world still holds secrets capable of surprising even modern science. And somewhere beneath the oceans, the deserts, and the forests of our planet, other forgotten inventions may still be waiting to be discovered. Throughout this journey, we have traveled across deserts, oceans, mountains, and even the silence of deep space. We stood before ancient stone structures that seem almost impossible in their scale. We opened books that no one on Earth has been able to read. We followed the footsteps of explorers, scientists, and investigators searching for answers that remain just out of reach. Each mystery we explored tonight came from a different place, a different culture, a different time in history. Yet despite those differences, they share something deeply familiar. They remind us that human knowledge is still incomplete. For most of our lives, we are taught to believe that history is a finished story. We learn about empires that rose and fell, about discoveries that changed the world, about inventions that shaped civilization. But every once in a while, the past reveals something unexpected, a structure that seems too advanced for its time, an event that cannot be fully explained, a signal that appears once and never again. And when those moments appear, they open a doorway not just into the past, but into the unknown, because mystery is not simply about what we do not understand. Mystery is about the edge of knowledge, the boundary between what humanity knows and what we have yet to discover. Think for a moment about how much our understanding of the world has changed in just the last 100 years. At the beginning of the 20th century, we had not yet walked on the moon. We had not yet discovered DNA. We had not yet CRISPRed DNA. We had not yet sent spacecraft beyond our solar system. The universe itself seemed smaller and less complex than it does today. But as technology improved and curiosity pushed us forward, new discoveries began to appear, each one expanding the boundaries of human understanding. Yet even with all our progress, mysteries remain everywhere, hidden beneath oceans, buried beneath ancient cities, encoded within signals from the stars. And sometimes these mysteries survive not because they are impossible to solve, but because the right discovery has not yet been made. Somewhere, perhaps in a forgotten archive or a newly excavated ruin, a small piece of evidence may exist that could suddenly explain what once seemed impossible. History has shown us that many mysteries eventually find answers. Ancient languages once thought unreadable are eventually decoded. Lost cities buried beneath jungles are revealed by new technology. Natural phenomena that once inspired legends are explained through careful study. But not every mystery is solved quickly. Some remain unanswered for generations, sometimes centuries. And in those moments, mystery becomes something valuable, because it reminds us to keep asking questions. It reminds us that curiosity is one of the most powerful forces driving human progress. Without curiosity, explorers would never cross oceans, scientists would never test new ideas, and archaeologists would never dig beneath the surface of the earth searching for the past. Curiosity is the reason we continue to look deeper, to listen more carefully, to search the skies for signals that might tell us we are not alone. Every mystery we explored tonight began with someone noticing something unusual, a strange artifact uncovered by a farmer, a sound heard only by a few residents in a quiet town, a pattern appearing unexpectedly in the data of a radio telescope. At first, these moments may seem small, but they often become the starting point for extraordinary discoveries. Sometimes the answer turns out to be simpler than expected. Other times, the answer reveals something far more fascinating than the original mystery. Either way, the process of searching for truth expands our understanding of the world. And perhaps that is the most important lesson hidden within every mystery. The unknown is not something to fear, it is something to explore. The universe itself is filled with unanswered questions. We still do not fully understand how life began on Earth. We are still searching for signs of life beyond our planet, and we are still uncovering lost chapters of human history buried beneath deserts, oceans, and forests. Each new discovery reminds us that the story of humanity is still unfolding. The past is not fully written. The future is not fully known. And somewhere out there, new mysteries are waiting to be discovered. Perhaps the next great archaeological discovery is still hidden beneath layers of soil. Perhaps a signal from deep space will one day repeat itself, revealing a message we can finally understand. Or perhaps the answers to some mysteries will remain forever beyond our reach. And maybe that is part of their beauty. Because mystery gives the universe a sense of wonder. It reminds us that no matter how much we learn, there will always be more to explore. As you leave this journey tonight, take a moment to think about the mysteries that surround us every day, the strange stories that appear in the news, the unexplained events recorded by scientists, the artifacts uncovered by archaeologists. Some of them may turn out to have simple explanations. Others may lead to discoveries that reshape our understanding of history. But every mystery begins with a question, and every question has the potential to lead somewhere remarkable. So keep your curiosity alive. Look at the world with the same sense of wonder that inspired the explorers, scientists, and investigators whose stories we followed tonight. Because the search for answers is not limited to laboratories or archaeological sites. It belongs to everyone who is willing to ask questions and explore the unknown. And who knows, the next great mystery might already be waiting somewhere out there, just beyond the edge of what we currently understand. Until then, the stories we explore tonight remain open, their answers still hidden somewhere in time, in nature, or perhaps even among the stars. And perhaps that is what makes them so powerful. They remind us that the world is still full of questions, and that the journey of discovery is far from over. If you enjoyed exploring these mysteries, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss future journeys into history, science, and the unexplained. Leave a comment sharing which mystery fascinated you the most, or which unsolved mystery you believe deserves to be explored next. And if you know someone who loves history, ancient civilizations, or strange unexplained stories, consider sharing this video with them, because curiosity grows stronger when it is shared. Thank you for joining this journey. And until our next exploration, keep wondering, keep questioning, and keep looking beyond the edges of what we think we know.